The day before my son's wedding, his fiancée leaned in close, her eyes sparkling with spite, and said, "You know what the perfect gift would be if you disappeared from our lives forever." So I granted her wish. I sold the mansion they thought was their wedding present and left a final personalized gift for every single guest. What was inside those envelopes, a secret that exposed their lies she will never forget. I am Thaddeus Coleman. I am 73 years old, and until yesterday, I was the proud, foolish father of Julian Coleman. I built my life from scratch, turning a few dollars and a good ear for music into a small record label empire. I am financially sound, but I have always lived simply a habit Julian grew to despise. He saw my modest brownstone, my old fishing boat, and my quiet life as a source of deep, embarrassing shame. The conflict didn't start with a bang. It started with the quiet sound of a cup hitting an expensive tile floor. We were at the final rehearsal for the wedding at a boutique downtown. It was supposed to be a celebratory day, but Julian insisted I come along. Not for advice, but because they needed my credit card to pay for the last-minute alterations to Brittany's $50,000 gown. I was sitting in a plush antique chair near the dressing rooms holding a cheap paper cup of coffee the tailor offered me. My hands, which have signed millions of dollars worth of contracts, sometimes tremble now. They are 73 years old. It happens. And it happened then. The coffee cup slipped, not a flood, just a dark splash of lukewarm liquid landed on the pristine white marble floor, a few drops spotting the train of Brittany's gown which was spread out for fitting. The sound Brittany made was not a sound of surprise. It was a guttural sound of sheer, unadulterated fury. She stopped talking to the tailor and slowly turned. Her face, usually flawless and controlled for the perfect Instagram selfie, was contorted with disgust. "Oh my God," she hissed, her voice low but sharp as a razor. "Look at that. Just look at what you have done, you clumsy old fool." She strode over, pointing at the small coffee puddle with a finger that held a 3-carat diamond I had paid for. "You are impossible," she spat, ignoring the tailor who was rushing over with a cleaning cloth. "You are a menace. I told Julian you couldn't be trusted near anything expensive. You are going to ruin my wedding." She grabbed a silk scarf from the nearby table, which I realized was part of her accessories, and violently dabbed at the faint coffee mark on her dress, making the spot worse. Julian. My son rushed over. I expected him to step between us, to calm his wife, to apologize for my clumsiness. Instead, he looked at the floor, then at the dress, and finally at me. His eyes held not concern, but sheer blinding embarrassment. "Dad, for God's sake," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Can't you control yourself? Just go to the bathroom. Clean up." He didn't defend me. He didn't touch me. He treated the mess on the floor with more respect than his own father. I stood up slowly. I picked up the paper cup, and the few drops of coffee on the floor felt like a weight of 20 years of disappointment. Brittany was still fuming. She dismissed the tailor with a wave of her hand and glared at me. She took one step closer, invading my space, and lowered her voice to a poisonous whisper meant only for me. Her breath smelled of mint and arrogance. "You know what the perfect gift would be, Thaddeus," she said, her smile utterly devoid of humanity. "If you disappeared from our lives forever, if you just vanished, that would be the best wedding present you could ever give us. You are old, you are ugly, and you are messing up the aesthetic of my life. Banish yourself." The air left my lungs. Not from shock, but from the realization that she meant every single word. She was not just cruel, she was finished with the pretense. I looked over her shoulder at my son. Julian had heard every word. I saw his shoulders tense. He knew exactly what she had said. Instead of defending me, instead of looking at his wife, he deliberately turned his head toward the full-length mirror and began adjusting the knot of his expensive tie, pretending the whole interaction was merely a reflection he could ignore. He chose her. He chose the lie. He chose the shame. I looked back at Brittany. The initial surge of anger was replaced by a cold, clear resolve. She wanted me gone. She wanted a gift. "You know what, Brittany?" I said, my voice quiet, gravelly, but firm. "You are right. Your wish is my command." I didn't apologize. I didn't defend myself. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out the gold Amex card she desperately wanted me to use, and handed it to the tailor without a word. "Charge the full amount for the gown to this, and send the receipt to Mr. Coleman here," I told the tailor. I walked toward the exit, ignoring Julian's sudden, desperate whisper of "Dad, wait," and Brittany's startled confusion. I walked out of the tailor's shop and into the bright sunlight. I felt lighter. I felt free. I felt terrifyingly capable. The clock was ticking and the game had just changed. Brittany wanted a vanishing act. Julian wanted a gift. I was about to give them both a lesson in structural demolition. You cannot build a beautiful life on a foundation of rot. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for my longtime lawyer, Lucius. Lucius, I said, my voice low and hard. It's Thaddeus. Initiate the sale of the Coleman Avenue property. Cash deal only. I want the deed signed and notarized by Wednesday, and I need a full financial audit on Julian's studio starting 6 months back. The house they thought was their wedding gift, the one Julian had promised Brittany, was about to be sold out from under them, and I was just getting started. The drive to the house on Coleman Avenue felt different. I had bought the 3-story Victorian property a year ago because I remembered Julian pointing it out as a kid. He always loved the stained glass windows and the iron-wrought fence. It had been run down, but I poured my heart and my silent money into renovating it for him and Brittany. It was going to be their wedding surprise. The grand gesture I thought would finally make Julian see me not as a checkbook, but as a proud father. The house stood tall and proud now. High ceilings, original mahogany paneling, a kitchen that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. Everything was chosen with care to honor its history. It was a home built to last. Julian was already there, waiting in the driveway. He looked nervous. "Dad, you here?" he said, adjusting his jacket. "Looks good, right?" "It is beautiful, son," I said honestly. "The brickwork is clean, the foundation is solid. I was careful with the bones." Julian barely listened. He was watching Brittany, who was stepping out of her taxi looking unimpressed. She wore sunglasses that covered half her face and carried a tiny dog that looked more pampered than either of us. She approached the front porch and stopped her hands on her hips. "Is this it?" she asked Julian, her voice tight and high. "Yeah, babe," Julian said, beaming. "This is it, the wedding gift. $2 million of history." Brittany took off her sunglasses. Her eyes scanned the facade. She didn't look impressed. She looked disappointed. "It is old, Julian," she stated flatly. "I mean really old. It smells like mothballs and potpourri. And that porch railing. It is country." She walked inside, kicking off her heels on the original hardwood floor. I followed Julian, trailing behind them like a servant. "It is vintage, babe," Julian pleaded. "It is classic. Look at the pocket doors. Look at the fireplace. They don't build them like this anymore." "Exactly," Brittany snapped. "They don't. Because people want space and light, not dark wood and dusty carpets. This is a museum, Julian, not a penthouse. And look at this kitchen, Dad. You put brass fixtures in the kitchen." "Brass? It looks like something my grandmother would use." I bit back the sharp reply that sprang to my lips. My hands were already trembling. This house was a piece of my history, my taste, my sacrifice, and she was judging it with the cold eye of a spoiled child who had never earned anything in her life. "We can remodel it," Julian said weakly. "We can tear out the wood and put in chrome and glass." I didn't say anything. I slipped away into the study, a small room tucked behind the grand staircase. I checked the antique fuse box, pretending to inspect the wiring. The truth was, I needed to hide. I needed to let the anger cool before I spoke words I couldn't take back. I heard their voices drifting in from the living room. Julian was trying to defend the house. Brittany was tearing it apart. "It is just too much work, Julian," she complained. "It will cost a fortune to update it to my aesthetic. And honestly, all that dark wood reminds me of, well, it reminds me of where we come from, you know." She lowered her voice, but the high ceilings carried the sound perfectly into the empty study. "This is what we are going to do," she said, her voice sharp and calculating. "We take the deed at the wedding. We sell this mausoleum immediately. We buy a glass box penthouse in River North. Something modern. Something that smells like money, not like history." I leaned against the wall, the cold plaster seeping into my spine. I was listening now, not as a father, but as a recording engineer listening for feedback in the wires. I was listening for the flaw in the composition. "But Julian," Julian stammered, "your father, he poured a lot of work into this." "He poured money into it," Brittany corrected him. "And now that money is ours. Look, Julian, the old fool, is 73. He is shaking when he holds a cup of coffee. He is one bad flu away from the grave, but he still needs care. And honestly, I am not changing his diapers." I heard the sound of her expensive heels clicking closer to the study door. I pulled myself deeper into the shadows behind the fuse box. "Here is the real plan," she whispered. "After we get the deed and the congratulations from the guests, we tell him we found him the perfect place. A small facility in the suburbs. Cheap, but clean. The kind of place where he can watch daytime TV and eat pureed food. Julian said nothing. His silence was the real betrayal. We keep him there, she continued. We sell the house. We use the cash to pay off your debts and buy the penthouse. We keep him alive just long enough to collect his pension until he finally dies off like the old relic he is. It is the perfect gift for us both. Your freedom in my penthouse. It is elegant. It is clean. And he will be out of our hair forever. I stood there in the dark of the study, feeling the words land in my gut like a shovelful of cold dirt. I was not a father. I was a resource. I was a burden. I was something to be sold and discarded for the perfect view of the city. Julian had been complicit. He had listened to her plan to sell the house I had bought him, to throw the man who raised him into a cheap grave, and he had done nothing. His silence was consent. His shame was treason. I reached into my pocket, not for my wallet, for my burner phone. The one Dante didn't know about, the one I used for transactions that had to remain untraceable. I pulled it out. My fingers didn't tremble this time. They were steady, cold, and professional. They were the hands of a man who was about to sign a death warrant. I texted my real estate agent, not the one Julian knew, my own man. I typed 3 words, cancel deed transfer. Then I typed 4 more. Put Coleman Ave House on market, today. I hit send. The signal light flashed green, confirming the message went through. The house was sold. It was gone. It was no longer the symbol of my love. It was no longer the wedding gift. It was just an asset I had liquidated. I put the phone away. I stepped out of the study. Julian and Brittany were in the foyer looking satisfied. I smiled at them, a genuine cold smile that felt alien on my face. Beautiful house, isn't it? I said. Oh, Dad, it is, she said, her voice now sickeningly sweet. Just perfect. I looked at Julian. He avoided my gaze. I just hope you two will be very happy here, I said. We will, Dad, Julian replied weakly. We will. They didn't know that the house had already been sold. They didn't know that the floor they were standing on already belonged to someone else. They didn't know that their dream penthouse had just been bought with the cash from the property they just verbally despised. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried me. They didn't know that the game had just flipped and I was already several moves ahead. The vanishment had begun, and the first thing to disappear was their wedding gift. I was at Julian Penthouse Studio, again supposed to be checking the balance on the soundboard I bought him last year. I told him I was optimizing the signal flow, but really I was just trying to feel useful, trying to touch the edges of his life before I disappeared completely. He was out picking up the marriage license, and Brittany was at a spa getting her skin polished for the main event. Julian left his old service iPad lying on the console. It was synced to all his accounts, but it still ran on the old iOS update I always told him to fix. A notification popped up across the screen, cutting across the digital clock display. It was a message from Brittany. I didn't mean to read it. My eyes just fell on the text. The name at the top was not Brittany. It was Mike Best. Michael Johnson, Julian best man since high school. His best friend. His most trusted confidant. The message was short, casual. See you tomorrow night at the usual spot. We need to celebrate my last night of freedom. I froze. I stood still, the heat from the mixing console warm against my hands. I am a producer. I know sound. I know performance. I know when a beat is off. And this beat was dead wrong. I moved the cursor and tapped the message history. I did not need a password. Julian always used his birthday. I accessed the thread. The messages stretched back months. They were not subtle. They were intimate. They were graphic. I scrolled slowly, reading every word. Michael was not just having an affair with Julian's fiancée. He was having a long-term, sustained relationship with the woman my son was about to marry. The deception was not a last-minute drunken mistake. It was a calculated collaboration. I saw pictures, photos that should have ended up in a court filing, not on Julian's work device. I felt a cold wave of nausea hit me. I am 73 years old. I have seen betrayal in the music business that would make your stomach turn. But this felt different. This was my blood. I kept scrolling. I needed to understand the why, the mechanics of the structural failure. I was still looking for the crack in the foundation. And then I found it. The message that connected the sex and the secrecy directly to the financial scheme. It was from Brittany to Michael just last week. I am exhausted. He is so clingy. Crying about my mother saying he is a king. Just get the old man to sign the house over to Julian at the wedding like we planned, and then I am done. Michael Best had replied. I know, baby. Just hold on until the deed is done. Once that idiot has the mansion you file, we can be together and sell that tacky old house for something modern. The deed, the house, the insult, the word idiot. It was all there. Julian was not just going to be left at the altar, he was going to be publicly cuckolded and then robbed by his best friend and his wife in the divorce settlement. They were going to use the wealth I built for him as their own ticket to freedom. I stood there in the quiet of the recording studio, the flashing lights of the equipment mocking the darkness in my soul. I could feel the cold fury building not just against Brittany and Michael, but against Julian too. He was so desperate for acceptance, so ashamed of his black heritage and his father that he had become blind, deaf, and dumb. He refused to see the signs. He was begging to be destroyed. I did not panic. I am a producer. When disaster strikes, you do not run. You capture the audio. I reached into the small toolbox I always carried for minor equipment repairs. I pulled out a small black USB drive that I used for transferring high-resolution audio files. I plugged it into the iPad. I quickly selected the entire message thread, the photos, the timestamps. I started the download. The little bar across the screen moved agonizingly slowly. Every second felt like an hour. If Julian walked in now, if he saw what I was doing, he would call the police. He would have me institutionalized faster than I could speak my own name. He would believe his fiancée lie over his father truth because the lie was prettier. The lie smelled like lilies and expensive perfume. The truth smelled like betrayal. Finally, the transfer was complete. I ejected the drive and put it securely in my pocket. I deleted the recent activity log on the iPad just to buy myself time. I straightened the console. I wiped the screen of any fingerprints. I sat back in the mixing chair. My hands were steady now. The tremor was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, resolute purpose. I should warn him. That was the father instinct. I should tell him his best friend is sleeping with his wife. I should tell him the wedding is a front for a heist. I should save him the humiliation. But I looked at the dark wood of the console. I thought about the words idiot and tacky old house. I remembered Julian standing in the tailor shop letting that woman insult the man who paid for everything. I remembered his shame. No, I would not save him. Saving him would be robbing him of the only chance he had left, the chance to wake up, the chance to finally see the world clearly. He had built his life on sand. He needed the wave to come in and wash it all away. He needed to be stripped bare. He needed to be left with nothing but the skin on his back and the name he was so ashamed of. Only then would he learn the value of the things he had thrown away. I pulled out my secure phone again. I texted Lucius. We have new evidence, audio and video, high grade. It links the financial fraud directly to the marriage and the best man. We are escalating the charges. I want Michael Johnson added to the list of co-conspirators. Get the police involved. Tax evasion fraud and conspiracy to commit divorce fraud. I put the phone away. I stood up. The silence in the studio felt complete. I walked out of Julian Penthouse, closing the door behind me. I was leaving the idiot to his fate. Tomorrow was the wedding rehearsal dinner. I would be there. I would watch him smile. And I would prepare the stage for the most spectacular, necessary act of structural demolition he would ever witness. I had all the evidence I needed. Now all I needed was the right audience. I sat on the single wooden stool in the center of my living room, the only piece of furniture left in the entire house. The echoes were already settling in, bouncing off the bare hardwood floors and the blank walls where my gold records used to hang. The house smelled different now. It smelled of emptiness. It smelled of a chapter closing with a slam. I had spent the last 24 hours supervising the movers. I didn't put anything in storage. I sold it. The vintage leather sofas, the mahogany dining table, the grand piano Julian used to bang on when he was a toddler, it was all gone. Sold to liquidators for pennies on the dollar. I didn't care about the profit. I cared about the erasure. I was scrubbing myself out of existence just like my daughter-in-law asked. I checked my watch. It was a cheap digital one now, not the Rolex I used to wear. It was 3 p.m. Julian would be here any minute. He had called me an hour ago, his voice high and tight with that specific panic that only money or the lack of it can produce. The front door didn't open. It exploded inward. Julian didn't knock. He never knocked anymore. He stormed in his Italian loafers, clicking loudly on the wood that used to be covered by a Persian rug. He was sweating. His tie was loosened and his eyes were darting around manically. Daddy shouted before he even fully entered the room. "We have a problem. A big problem. The venue," they called. They said there was a mix-up with the deposit transfer. They need cash. Today. Right now. Or they are giving our date to someone else. He stopped. He looked at me sitting on the stool. Then he looked around the room. He blinked. For a second, the geography of the house confused him. He took a step back as if he had walked into the wrong address. "Where is the TV?" he asked, his voice dropping. "Where is the couch? What happened here?" I didn't stand up. I just watched him. I watched the son I had raised, the boy I had protected from the harsh winds of Chicago reality. I saw the sweat on his brow, and I knew he was lying. The venue didn't need a deposit. The loan sharks needed a payment. He was probably $40,000 in the hole, and the interest was eating him alive. He needed $50,000 to buy himself another week of breathing room. "I am moving, Julian," I said, my voice calm and level. "Just like you wanted. Just like Brittany wanted." Julian waved his hand dismissively, as if my living situation was a fly he could swat away. Yeah, you are moving, great, whatever. But listen to me, Dad. I need $50,000. Cash. Today. It is an emergency. If I do not pay the venue, the wedding is off. Brittany will kill me. Her parents will kill me. You have to help me." He walked toward me, his hand out, palm up. The universal gesture of the beggar. "Just write me a check, Dad. Or go to the safe. I know you keep cash in the safe." "There is no safe." "Julian," I said. He froze. "What?" "I sold it," I said. "I sold the safe. I sold the furniture. I sold the paintings. I cleared it all out, son." He looked around again, and this time the reality of the emptiness truly hit him. His eyes went wide. The color drained from his face. He ran into the kitchen. I heard his footsteps echoing on the tile. He ran back into the living room. "The appliances," he gasped. "The fridge, the stove, they are gone. I told you," I said. "I am disappearing. Brittany said the best gift I could give you was to vanish from your lives. She said I was old and ugly and I messed up her aesthetic, so I am granting her wish. I am clearing the stage." Julian's face twisted. He wasn't hearing the lesson. He was only hearing the denial of his funds. "I do not care about Brittany aesthetic," he screamed. "I need the money, Dad. You do not understand. They are going to... the wedding is going to be ruined." He was slipping. He almost said they are going to hurt me. He almost told the truth. But he caught himself. He clung to the lie like a drowning man clinging to a rock. "You have money," he insisted. "You sold the label. You have savings. Stop playing games and give it to me." I stood up slowly. My knees cracked. I walked over to the fireplace mantel, which was bare except for one single white envelope. I picked it up. "I do not have the cash, Julian," I said. I used it to settle my own debts, to pay the movers, to set up my new life where you cannot find me. But I did leave you something." Julian's eyes locked onto the envelope. He licked his lips. He thought it was a check. He thought I had saved him again. He thought I was the same old fool who always bailed him out. "Is that it?" he whispered, reaching out. "Is that the 50 grand? "It is a gift," I said, holding it out. "A parting gift. Use it wisely." He snatched the envelope from my hand. He tore it open, his fingers shaking so bad he almost dropped it. He reached inside and pulled out the contents. It was not a stack of bills. It was not a cashier check. It was a single scratch-off lottery ticket, a $1 ticket from the gas station on the corner, and the gray latex had already been scratched off. It was a losing ticket. 3 cherries and a lemon. Julian stared at the ticket. He flipped it over. He looked inside the envelope again, hoping to find a check stuck to the bottom. There was nothing. He looked up at me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "What is this?" he hissed. "It is a chance, son," I said. "Just like the chance I gave you when I paid for your college. Just like the chance I gave you when I bought your studio. You play the game, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That one is a loser. Just like your plan." You old bastard," he screamed. "You think this is funny. You think this is a joke. I need that money. I do not have it." I lied. "I am broke, Julian. The well is dry. I spent it all on moving. I am just a poor old man now, remember. That is what you tell your friends. That is what Brittany tells her family." He crumpled the lottery ticket in his fist. He threw it at my face. It bounced off my chest and fluttered to the floor. "You are lying," he yelled. "You are hoarding it. You are hiding it from me." He looked around the room again, desperate for something to break, something to hurt. His eyes landed on the stool, the only thing left in the house. He picked it up. It was solid oak, heavy and old. He raised it over his head. He screamed a sound of pure frustration and fear. He smashed the stool against the hardwood floor. One leg snapped off. He hit it again and again. Splinters flew. The wood cracked and groaned. He destroyed the only seat in the house. He destroyed the last piece of comfort I had left him. I watched him. I didn't flinch. I didn't try to stop him. I let him expend his fury on the wood because better the wood than me. He stood there panting, his chest heaving, surrounded by the wreckage of the stool. He looked at me. He looked at the empty house. "I hate you," he whispered. "I hate you. I hope you die alone in whatever hole you are crawling into." "I already died, Julian," I said softly. "The father you knew died the minute you let that woman speak to me like a dog. This is just the ghost." He spat on the floor. He turned and stormed out of the house, leaving the front door wide open. I heard his car engine roar to life and tires screeching as he peeled out of the driveway. I stood in the silence. I looked at the broken stool. I looked at the crumpled losing lottery ticket on the floor. He hadn't asked if I had a place to sleep. He hadn't asked if I had food. He had only asked for money. And when there was no money, there was no sun. I walked to the door and closed it. I locked it. I picked up my small bag from the corner. I didn't need much. I walked out the back door into the alley. A black sedan was waiting. Lucius was behind the wheel. "Did he take it?" Lucius asked as I got in. "He broke the stool," I said. Lucius nodded. He did not need to ask anything else. "Drive," I said. "The wedding is in 2 days. I have a reservation to confirm." We drove away from the empty house. I didn't look back. The demolition was proceeding exactly as planned. Julian had just destroyed the furniture. He didn't know that on Saturday I was going to destroy the foundation. The neon sign of the motel room buzzed with a rhythmic electric hum that sounded like a dying fly. I was sitting on the edge of a bedspread that smelled of industrial detergent and other people's bad choices. My personal belongings, the few I had kept, were packed in a single leather duffel bag by the door. I had sold the house. I had sold the furniture. I was officially a man with no fixed address. To the outside world, I was a tragic figure, an old man pushed out of his home by poverty. To me, I was a general in a bunker, waiting for the enemy to make contact. I didn't have to wait long. My phone lit up on the nightstand. The screen displayed a picture of a smiling blonde angel, Brittany. It was a photo Julian had taken on their engagement trip, a trip I had paid for. But the name flashing underneath wasn't Angel. It was The Vulture. I picked up the phone. "I didn't say hello. I didn't have time." "You useless old man," Brittany shrieked. The volume was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Her voice wasn't the polished influencer-ready tone she used on social media. It was the raw, jagged sound of greed denied. "Julian just came back," she screamed. "He told me everything. You sold the house. You sold the furniture. You left him with a scratch-off ticket. Are you insane? Do you have dementia? We needed that money, Thaddeus. We had plans." I let her scream. I let the venom pour out of the speaker and fill the small, dingy room. She called me names that would make a sailor blush. She insulted my clothes, my hygiene, my intelligence, and my race. She told me I was an embarrassment to her family. She told me that she had been right all along, that I was nothing but a burden, a leech on her perfect future. I sat there calm as a frozen lake. I imagined her on the other end, probably pacing in her parents' living room, her face red, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. She was panicking. The wedding was 48 hours away. The vendors needed to be paid. The loan sharks were circling Julian. Her house of cards was shaking in the wind. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke. My voice was low, trembling just enough to sell the performance. "I am sorry, Brittany," I said. "I did not mean to upset you." "Upset me?" She laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You ruined me. You ruined us. Julian is a wreck. He is crying in the bathroom. How are we supposed to pay for the catering? How are we supposed to pay for the venue? You promised to help." "I did promise," I said. "And I keep my promises. That is why I sold everything." "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "You gave him a losing lottery ticket." "That was a lesson," I said softly. a lesson for Julian. But the money, the real money, I have it. The line went silent. The screaming stopped instantly. I could almost hear her brain shifting gears, the greed overriding the anger. What money, she asked, her voice dropping an octave, becoming suspicious but hungry. I sold the house for cash, I lied. The furniture too. And I cashed out my retirement bonds. I emptied the safe deposit box. I have been saving for 50 years, Brittany. I have the deed to the Victorian house on Coleman Avenue. And I have a cashier check for the rest. It is substantial. How substantial, she whispered. Enough to buy that penthouse you wanted, I said, and enough to set up a trust fund that will pay you a monthly stipend for the rest of your lives. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to hand it to you on your wedding day. The grand gesture. I let the silence stretch. I let the numbers dance in her head. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She was thinking about the view from the penthouse. She was thinking about the designer bags she could buy. She was thinking that the old man wasn't broke, he was just eccentric. But you gave him a ticket, she stammered. I was testing him, I said. I wanted to see if he still had any fight in him. But you are the smart one, Brittany. You are the one with the vision. I know you want me gone. I know you want me out of your lives. I do, she said automatically, then caught herself. I mean, we just want our privacy. I understand, I said, and I am ready to give you that gift, the greatest gift. I will disappear, Brittany. I will get on a bus the morning after the wedding and you will never see me again. I will go down south. I will vanish. Really, she breathed. Yes, I said, but I have one condition. What is it? She asked quickly. Anything. I need to give you the gifts at the wedding, I said. I need to hand you the deed and the check in person, at the reception. I want to make a toast. I want to say goodbye properly. I want everyone to see that I did right by my son. There was a pause. I knew she was calculating. She didn't want me there. She was ashamed of me. She didn't want her rich friends to see the old black man in the cheap suit. But she wanted the money more. Her greed was the leash and I was holding the handle. You just want to give a toast, she asked. That is all I said. 5 minutes. Then I walk out the door and out of your life. With the check in your hand. I heard her muffled voice as she covered the phone, probably speaking to her mother. I heard whispers. Then she came back on the line. Her voice was completely different now. It was coated in sugar. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. Oh, Dad, she said, and the word Dad sounded like a slur coming from her mouth. Of course you can come. We were just so stressed. You know how weddings are. Emotions run high. We didn't mean what we said. I know I said. I know you love me. We do love you, she lied effortlessly. We love you so much. And we would be honored to have you make a toast. It would mean the world to Julian. And to me. So I am invited, I asked. Invited. You are the guest of honor, she gushed. I will tell the planner to set a place for you at the family table, right next to my parents. No, I said quickly. No. I do not want to impose. Put me in the back, somewhere quiet. I just want to watch. I do not want to be in the way of your beautiful photos. Oh, well, if you prefer, she said, probably relieved that she wouldn't have to Photoshop me out of the pictures later. We can find a nice spot for you. Good, I said. I will see you Saturday then. Saturday, she agreed. And Dad, bring the documents, make sure they are safe. They are safe, I said. They are right here in my pocket. I cannot wait to see you, she said. I cannot wait either, I replied. She hung up. I lowered the phone. The room was quiet again. The hum of the neon sign seemed louder. I looked at the leather bag by the door. Inside there was indeed a folder. There were documents. But they weren't the documents she thought. There was a deed, yes. But it was a deed transfer to a charity dated and signed yesterday. There was a check, yes. But it was a photocopy of a donation I had made to the United Negro College Fund in her name. And there was the USB drive, the drive with the messages, the drive with the photos of her and Michael, the drive that proved she was a fraud, a cheat, and a liar. She wanted a gift. She wanted a surprise. She wanted me to disappear. I was going to give her all three. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at my reflection. I looked tired. My eyes were rimmed with red. My beard was gray. I looked like an old man who had been beaten down by life. But then I smiled. It was a small, tight smile, the smile of a wolf who just heard the trap snap shut. "You invited the wrong guest, Brittany," I whispered to the mirror. "You invited the storm." I turned off the light. I had 2 days to kill, 2 days to refine the speech, 2 days to prepare the final act of Thaddeus Coleman. I lay down on the lumpy mattress. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in months, I slept like a baby. I slept with the peaceful, deep sleep of a man who knows that justice is coming, and it is wearing a cheap suit and carrying a black envelope. The invitation was accepted. The stage was set. Now all I had to do was show up and burn it all down. The Grandview Resort lived up to its name and price tag only. It sat on a cliff overlooking the lake, a sprawling complex of white marble and gold leaf that screamed new money, trying desperately to look old. The air smelled of imported orchids and the ocean breeze, but underneath it all I could smell the rot. It was the smell of debt. It was the smell of people spending money they did not have to impress people they did not like. I arrived in a taxi. I had parked my Rolls-Royce 3 towns over in a secure garage. Today, I was not Thaddeus Coleman, the music mogul. I was Thaddeus the embarrassment. I wore the same suit I had worn to the rehearsal, a charcoal gray number that was clean but threadbare at the cuffs. I carried my old canvas tote bag, the one I used for groceries. To the valets and the security guards, I looked like a man who had taken a wrong turn on his way to the bus stop. I walked up the grand staircase. The guests were mingling on the terrace, sipping champagne that cost $30 a glass. I recognized the type. Men in linen suits who talked too loud about their portfolios. Women in hats that defied gravity and good taste. They were the St. James crowd. The friends of Brittany parents, the people who thought Chicago was flyover country and that Detroit was a war zone. I moved through them like a ghost. They looked right through me. Their eyes would slide over my face and move on, instantly finding nothing of value to latch onto. I was black, I was old, I was poor. In their world, I was furniture. I was less than furniture. I was a smudge on the lens. I reached the entrance to the grand ballroom. A young woman with a headset and a clipboard stood guard. She looked like she was guarding the gates of heaven, and she was not about to let a sinner in. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Thaddeus Coleman," I said. "Father of the groom." Her pen stopped moving. She looked up. Her eyes widened slightly, taking in my suit, my bag, my face. She tapped her earpiece. "The father is here," she whispered. "Where do I put him?" She listened to a voice in her ear. A look of relief washed over her face. She pointed a manicured finger toward the far corner of the room. "Table 42, she said. "It is in the back, near the service entrance." I looked at the seating chart displayed on a gilded easel. The tables were arranged in concentric circles around the dance floor. The head table was for the wedding party. The inner circle was for the St. James family and their VIP guests. The outer circle was for distant relatives and business associates. And then there was table 42. It was not in a circle. It was shoved against the back wall behind a massive decorative pillar wrapped in silk flowers. It was next to the swinging doors where the waiters would be coming in and out with trays of dirty dishes. It was the penalty box. It was the table for the photographer assistant, the DJ girlfriend, and apparently the father of the groom. I walked into the ballroom. It was empty, save for the staff putting the finishing touches on the place settings. The room was magnificent, I will give them that. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks. The centerpieces were towering structures of white roses and hydrangeas. The silverware was heavy, gleaming silver. I walked past the VIP tables. I saw the name cards: Arthur St. James, Vivian St. James, the mayor. A couple of investment bankers I knew were under investigation by the SEC. I walked all the way to the back. To table 42. There was no centerpiece. There were no crystal glasses. Just standard water goblets and a view of a plaster column. I pulled out the chair. It was a folding chair, not the padded ones at the other tables. I sat down. The pillar blocked my view of the head table entirely. If I sat here, I would hear the wedding, but I would not see it. I would be a rumor, a ghost in the corner. I looked at the empty plate in front of me. I thought about the $2 million house I had bought them. I thought about the trust fund I had set up for Julian education. I thought about the nights I spent in the studio mixing tracks until my ears bled so he could have braces and piano lessons. And this was my reward. A folding chair behind a pillar next to the kitchen. I stood up. No, I was not going to sit here. I was not going to be hidden. They wanted me to be invisible, fine. I would be invisible. But I would be the kind of invisible that haunts you. I would be the gas leak in the basement. I would be the termite in the wall. I picked up my canvas tote bag. I opened it. Inside were 150 envelopes. They were beautiful envelopes. Heavy matte black paper, expensive, the kind you use for a funeral or a very exclusive invitation. On the front of each one I had embossed a single phrase in silver foil, a gift from the past. It was elegant. It was mysterious. It looked like a party favor. It looked like something a wealthy, eccentric father might give to celebrate his son union. I looked around. The staff was busy at the buffet stations. The coordinator was outside dealing with the guests. The room was mine. I moved. I walked to the head table first. I placed an envelope on Arthur St. James' plate right on top of the silk napkin. I placed one on Vivian plate. I placed one on Brittany's seat. I moved to the VIP tables, the inner circle, the people who mattered, the people whose approval Brittany and Julian were so desperate to buy. I moved quickly, silently. My hands were steady. I placed an envelope at every single setting on the bride side of the room. I watched myself in the reflection of the mirrors lining the walls, an old man in a cheap suit dealing out judgment like a card shark dealing poker. One waiter looked up and saw me. "Sir," he called out, "you cannot be over there. That is the family section." "I am family," I said, not stopping. "I am just delivering the party favors. My son forgot them." The waiter hesitated. He saw the expensive envelopes. He saw the silver foil. He decided it was above his pay grade. He went back to polishing spoons. I continued. Table 3. Table 4. Table 5. I didn't put any on the groom's side. Julian didn't have many guests, just a few college friends and some distant cousins I had invited. They were decent people. They didn't need to see this. This was a surgical strike. This was for the people who judged based on zip codes and bank balances. I placed the last envelope on the plate of a woman I recognized as the president of the local country club, a woman who had once called security on me because I was waiting for Julian in the lobby of her club. A gift from the past. It was a perfect title, because the past was exactly what was inside. The past they had tried to bury. The past they had lied about. The past that was about to come crashing down on their heads like a ton of bricks. I finished just as the doors opened and the first wave of guests began to drift in. I retreated to the shadows. I walked back to table 42, but I didn't sit down. I stood behind the pillar, my back against the wall. I merged with the darkness. I watched them come in. The laughter, the rustle of expensive fabric, the clinking of jewelry. They found their seats. They ooh and ahhed at the flowers. They critiqued the wine. And then they saw the envelopes. "Look at this," Arthur St. James boomed, his voice carrying over the crowd. "A gift. How charming." "Maybe it is a lottery ticket," someone laughed. "Or a check," another suggested. I heard the groom father has money tucked away. I watched Brittany parents pick up the black envelopes. I watched them run their fingers over the silver foil. They looked intrigued. They looked greedy. They thought it was a tribute. They thought it was an offering from the peasant to the royalty. "Open it," Vivian said. "Let us see what the old man gave us." I held my breath. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. "Open it," I whispered. "Open it and see what you bought." Arthur slid his finger under the flap of the envelope. The sound of tearing paper was crisp and sharp. It cut through the murmur of the crowd. He pulled out the contents. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a gift card. It wasn't a sentimental note. It was a document. A single sheet of paper folded in thirds. I watched his face. I watched the smile slide off his features like grease off a hot pan. I watched his skin turn the color of old milk. At the next table, the country club president opened hers. She gasped. A sound of pure, unadulterated shock. Across the room, envelopes were being torn open. The sound was like a flock of birds taking flight. Rip, rip, rip. And then silence. A silence so deep, so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I leaned forward from behind my pillar. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the exact moment the poison hit the bloodstream. Because inside those envelopes was not money. Inside those envelopes was the truth. And the truth was the one thing these people could not afford. The invisible guest had just served the first course. and it was going to be hard to swallow. The sound of paper tearing is usually a quiet thing, but in a room holding its breath, it sounded like bone snapping. One by one, the guests slid their fingers under the flaps of the heavy black envelopes. They were expecting luxury. They were expecting a token of the wealth they believed I possessed. They were expecting a gift card to Saks Fifth Avenue, or perhaps a crisp $100 bill as the eccentric thank you. The greed was palpable, hanging in the air like humidity. I watched from my exile behind the pillar. I watched Arthur St. James pull out the single sheet of paper. I watched his eyes adjust to the dim, romantic lighting. I watched the exact moment his brain processed what he was looking at. It was not a check. It was a credit report. Specifically, it was a consolidated debt statement for St. James Enterprises. It was a document that listed every liability, every lien, and every maxed-out line of credit that Arthur and Vivian had spent the last decade hiding. In bold black ink, right at the top, it showed the foreclosure notice on their Hamptons estate, the one they bragged about every summer. Below that was the bankruptcy filing for their shell company, a desperate maneuver to hide $12 million in bad loans. Arthur's face went from a flush of anticipation to the gray of a corpse. His hand shook so violently the paper rattled. He looked at Vivian. She was holding her own paper, a printout of a lawsuit from a jeweler suing them for theft of services. She looked like she was going to be sick right there on the white tablecloth. But they were not the only ones. At the table to my left, the country club president was reading a different document. This one was titled Personal Financial Statement of Dante King. It was a forensic dissection of my son's life. It showed the loans he had taken out against property he did not own. It showed the credit card debt he had racked up buying gifts for a woman who hated him. It showed a credit score that was lower than the temperature outside in a Chicago winter. The gasp that escaped the woman's lips was not polite. It was the sound of a socialite realizing she was sitting in a room full of frauds. "Oh my God," she whispered. But in the acoustics of the ballroom it carried. "They are broke. They are all broke." The whisper was the spark. The fire spread instantly. At table 5, a banker who had been considering investing in Dante's latest venture was looking at a printout of Dante gambling debts. He looked up, his eyes narrowing with fury. He crumpled the paper in his fist and glared at the back of Dante's head. At table 9, a cousin of the Vanderbilts was reading a dossier on the fake charity gala they had hosted last month, the one where the donations never made it to the charity. The room changed. The energy shifted from celebration to interrogation. The polite tinkling of glasses stopped. The laughter died. In its place was a low, buzzing murmur, a hive of angry bees waking up. "Did you see this? Foreclosure. Indicted for fraud. He has 0 assets." The whispers grew louder. Heads turned. Eyes that had been admiring the flowers and the dress were now fixed on the head table with predatory intensity. These were not friends, these were sharks. And they had just realized the water was full of blood. I looked at Arthur St. James. He felt the change. He felt the eyes on him. He looked up from the damning paper and scanned the room. He saw the judgment. He saw the disgust. He wanted to scream. I saw the muscles in his neck bunching. He wanted to stand up and deny it. He wanted to tear the paper into confetti and throw it in my face. He wanted to call security, but he could not. Because if he made a scene, if he shouted, if he drew even one more ounce of attention to himself, he would have to explain what was on that paper. He would have to admit that the document was real. Silence was his only shield. Denial was his only bunker. So he sat there. He sat there and he died 1,000 small deaths. He folded the paper with trembling hands and shoved it into his pocket as if hiding the evidence would erase the truth. He picked up his water glass and took a sip, but his hand was shaking so bad the water sloshed over the rim and stained his silk tie. Vivian was worse. She had frozen completely. She was staring straight ahead, a rictus of a smile plastered on her face like a mask that was slipping. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together wrong. She knew the woman at table 4 was whispering about her jewelry. She knew the man at table 7 was laughing at her husband. She knew their reign was over. And Dante, my son, he had not opened an envelope. There was not one at his place setting. I had spared him that specific indignity because I had something worse planned for him. But he sensed the shift. He felt the temperature in the room drop 20 degrees. He looked around, confused. He saw his guests reading papers. He saw the dark looks. He saw his father-in-law sweating through his suit. "Is everything okay?" Dante asked, leaning toward Arthur. "Shut up," Arthur hissed. The venom in his voice was audible even from my corner. "Just shut up and smile, you idiot." Dante recoiled as if he had been slapped. He looked at Tiffany. She was busy reading a text message on her phone, probably from her lover, probably confirming the rendezvous for later that night. She didn't notice the room turning against them. She was in her own world, a world where she was the victim and the victor. I leaned back against the cold plaster of the pillar. The waiter who had tried to stop me earlier walked by. He was carrying a tray of champagne. He looked at the tables. He saw the black envelopes. He saw the faces of the guests. He looked at me. He didn't say anything. He just gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. He knew. The staff always knows. They see the cracks before the foundation gives way. The tension in the room was physical. It was a stretched rubber band waiting to snap. The guests were no longer eating. They were watching. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop. They knew that a man who sends foreclosure notices as wedding favors does not stop there. They knew this was just the opening act. I checked my watch. It was time. The murmurs were getting louder. The word bankrupt was being tossed around like a beach ball. The shame was settling in, sticking to the Vanderbilts like tar. They were trapped in the spotlight of their own lies, paralyzed by the fear of total exposure. I pushed myself off the wall. My knees popped, but I didn't feel the pain. I felt light. I felt ready. I walked out from behind the pillar. I walked into the light. I didn't shuffle this time. I didn't tremble. I walked with the stride of a man who owns the building. It was time to take the stage. It was time to pick up the microphone. It was time to turn the whispers into a roar. The envelopes were just the paper trail. Now I was going to give them the verdict. The priest cleared his throat into the microphone, a wet, nervous sound that echoed through the cavernous hall. He was trying to wrangle the attention of a room that had just been hit by a financial grenade. The guests were still murmuring, holding the black envelopes like evidence at a crime scene. The air was thick with the smell of scandal. But the show had to go on. The contract, the marriage had to be signed before the ink on the bankruptcy papers dried. Dante nudged Tiffany. I saw the motion. It was sharp, aggressive. He was telling her to fix it. He was telling her to perform. Tiffany straightened her spine. She was a professional manipulator, and she knew how to find her light even when the stage was burning down. She handed her bouquet to her maid of honor, a woman who was currently reading a printout of her own unpaid catering bill from a previous Vanderbilt party. Tiffany turned to Dante. She took both his hands in hers. She looked deep into his eyes. If I didn't know better, if I didn't have the recording in my pocket, I would have believed her. She looked like an angel, a very expensive, desperate angel. Dante, she began, her voice trembling with an emotion that everyone assumed was love but I knew was fear. Dante, when I met you, I knew my life would change. You are not like the other men I have known. You are kind. You are generous. I stood in the shadows behind the pillar, listening to the lies drip from her mouth like poisoned honey. Generous. That was the code word. It meant he paid for things. It meant he was a mark. She continued, her voice gaining strength, trying to drown out the whispers in the room. I promise to love you for who you are, she said. Not for what you have, not for the material things, but for your soul, for your heart. I promise to stand by you in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth. She paused for effect, looking out at the crowd, daring them to challenge her devotion. Because true love isn't about bank accounts, she said, a single perfect tear rolling down her cheek. It is about building a future, a legacy, and I cannot wait to build that legacy with you. The audacity was breathtaking. She was standing there talking about poverty and wealth to a room full of people, holding proof of her family's insolvency. She was talking about building a legacy with a man she planned to divorce as soon as the deed to the penthouse cleared. It was time. I pushed myself off the wall. My knees popped a sound like a dry twig snapping in a quiet forest. I smoothed the front of my charcoal suit. I adjusted my tie. I didn't look at the guests. I didn't look at the priest. I looked at the stage. I started walking. My footsteps were heavy, deliberate. Click, click, click. I walked out of the shadows of the service entrance and into the center aisle. The same aisle Tiffany had walked down moments ago. The murmuring stopped. Heads turned. The guests saw the old man, the one who had been hiding behind the pillar, the one they thought was a senile relative or a crashing vagrant. Dante saw me first. His eyes went wide. He shook his head a minute motion that screamed, "No." He thought I was going to make a scene from the back. He thought I would shout from the cheap seats. He didn't expect me to take the stage. I kept walking. I passed the third row where the loan sharks were watching with amusement. I passed the front row where Patricia Vanderbilt was clutching her throat, looking like she was about to scream for the police. And then the obstacle appeared. A security guard stepped out from the side. He was a mountain of a man wearing an earpiece and a suit that strained at the shoulders. He wasn't one of my regular guys. He was venue security hired by the chateau. He didn't know me. All he saw was an old black man in a cheap suit interrupting a six-figure wedding. "Sir," the guard said, stepping into my path, his hand raised flat like a stop sign. "You need to take a seat. The ceremony is in progress." I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. "Sir," the guard boomed, moving to grab my arm. "I am going to have to ask you to leave." He reached for me. His hand was inches from my shoulder. He was going to drag me out. He was going to humiliate me in front of my son one last time. I didn't fight him. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my breast pocket. The guard tensed, thinking I was reaching for a weapon. I pulled out a card. It wasn't a business card. It wasn't a credit card. It was a heavy slice of anodized titanium, black as midnight, with gold lettering etched into the surface. It was the owner's key, the highest level of clearance pass for the King Holdings Hospitality Group. It was a card that existed only for 3 people in the world: me, my lawyer, and the CEO of the management company. I held it up. The light from the chandeliers hit the gold etching. King Holdings, proprietor, all access. The guard looked at the card. He stopped. He blinked. He looked at my face, then back at the card. He recognized the logo. He recognized the status. He knew that the man holding this card didn't just have a ticket. The man holding this card signed his paycheck. His posture changed instantly. The aggression evaporated, replaced by a terrified professional deference. He dropped his hand. He took a step back, bowing his head slightly. "Mr. King," he whispered, his face draining of color. I didn't know. I apologize, sir. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't have to. I just put the card back in my pocket and kept walking. The path was clear. I walked up the 3 marble steps to the altar. The sound of my boots on the stone was the only thing in the room. Dante was trembling. He looked at Tiffany, then at me. He looked like a man waking up from a dream to find a gun in his face. Tiffany stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She had stopped her vows mid-sentence. She looked at my suit, then at the way the guard had backed down. Confusion clouded her eyes. She didn't understand the power dynamic. She didn't understand why the help was walking onto the stage. I stopped between them. I stood right in front of the priest, who looked like he wanted to dive behind the pulpit. I looked at Tiffany. Up close, I could see the layers of makeup trying to hide the stress. I could see the pulse fluttering in her neck. "You mentioned a gift," I said, my voice low and gravelly, but projected perfectly by the acoustics of the apse. "You said the perfect gift would be if I disappeared." Tiffany flinched. She recognized the words. She remembered the dressing room. She remembered the coffee spill. "And you, Dante," I said, turning to my son, "you sent me a bill. $600,000, a contribution to your legacy." Dante swallowed hard. "Dad, please don't. Not here." I reached into my pocket again. I pulled out the microphone the priest had left on the stand. I turned it on. A high-pitched feedback whine pierced the air, making everyone wince. Then it settled into a hum. "I am here to deliver the gift," I boomed, my voice filling the castle, rolling over the heads of the stunned guests. I looked out at the crowd. I saw the shock. I saw the curiosity. "My son and his bride wanted a contribution," I said. "They wanted me to pay for this beautiful day. They wanted me to ensure their future." I turned back to Dante. I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf. "So I did. I paid for everything. But I think there has been a misunderstanding about the price." I gestured to the side of the stage where the AV technician, my man, was waiting. "Run it," I said. The technician hit a key. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The massive screens behind the altar, which had been displaying a looped video of burning candles, flickered and changed. The first image appeared. It was high definition. It was brutal. It was a photo of the Coleman Avenue house, the Victorian mansion I had renovated, the wedding gift. Tiffany gasped. "Oh God," she whispered. "The house." She thought I was giving it to her. She thought this was the moment of victory. She thought the old man had caved. It is a beautiful house, isn't it? I said into the mic. $2 million of restoration, mahogany floors, brass fixtures. I paused. But you didn't like the brass, did you, Tiffany? You said it looked like something your grandmother would use. You said it smelled like mothballs. You said you wanted to sell it and buy a penthouse. Tiffany's face went white. How did he know? Well, I have good news, I said. You don't have to worry about the renovations. I nodded to the technician. The image on the screen changed. A bright red stamp animated across the picture of the house. Sold. And underneath it a copy of a wire transfer receipt. Beneficiary St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Amount $2,200,000. The gasp from the crowd was audible. I sold it this morning, I said. Cash deal. And since you didn't want it, I donated the proceeds to charity. Children who actually need a roof over their heads. No, Tiffany screamed. That was mine. That was my house. It was never your house. I roared my voice, shaking the floorboards. It was my house. And I do what I want with my property. Dante looked like he was going to vomit. He grabbed Tiffany's arm to steady himself. But I'm not done, I said, dropping my voice to a dangerous whisper. That was just the appetizer. You wanted a contribution to your honeymoon. You wanted to go to the Maldives. I signaled the technician again. The screen changed, and the room went silent as the grave. Because what was on the screen now wasn't a house, it wasn't a check, it was a photo of a car. A black SUV parked in a secluded lane. The windows were foggy, but the license plate was clearly visible. And through the front windshield you could see two people. One was Tiffany, and the other was not Dante. The lights in the ballroom dimmed until the only illumination came from the massive LED screens towering behind the altar. The air conditioner hummed a low bass note that vibrated in the floorboards. I stood center stage, the microphone in my hand, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes drilling into me. Dante was trembling beside me, his face a portrait of dread, but Brittany was watching the screen. The technician hit the cue. The static cleared. A high-resolution photograph filled the wall behind us. It was the house on Coleman Avenue. It looked magnificent. The professional lighting captured the deep red of the Victorian brick, the intricate detailing of the iron fence, the way the morning sun hit the stained glass windows I had paid artisans to restore. It didn't look like a house. It looked like a legacy. It looked like $2 million of solid equity. I heard the sound of breath catching in throats. The guests whispered, admiring the property. Even the Vanderbilts in the front row sat up straighter, recognizing the value of the real estate. But the reaction I was watching for was Brittany. She gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth, but this time it wasn't in horror. It was in delight. Her eyes went wide, and the greed that lived behind them flared up like a match in a dark room. For a moment she forgot the ruined wedding. She forgot the exposed fraud. She forgot that I was the enemy. She grabbed Dante's arm, digging her nails into his sleeve. "Look," she whispered loud enough for the microphone to pick up. He did it. He actually did it. She looked at me, and for a split second she smiled. It was a triumphant smile. She thought I had caved. She thought the old man had bowed down to her demands one last time. She thought this was the apology gift. She thought she had won the war, and the spoils were a 3-story mansion she planned to flip for a glass box in the sky. I let the image hang there for a moment. I let her soak in the victory. I let her mentally decorate the living room and calculate the listing price. "It is a beautiful house, isn't it?" I said, my voice calm and conversational, booming through the speakers. Brittany nodded eagerly, stepping forward slightly, her ruined dress forgotten. "It is, Dad," she said, slipping back into the role of the daughter-in-law. "It is stunning. I bought it a year ago." I continued walking slowly across the stage. I spent 6 months restoring the mahogany floors. I imported the brass fixtures from a foundry in London. I wanted it to be a home, a place to raise a family, a place with roots. I stopped and looked at her. "But you didn't like the roots, did you, Brittany?" Her smile faltered. "You visited the house last week," I said. "You stood in the foyer. And do you remember what you said?" She froze. She remembered. I could see the memory crash into her greed. "You said it smelled like mothballs." I recounted, my voice hardening. "You said the brass looked like something your grandmother would use. You called it a museum. You told Dante that the minute the deed was signed you were going to sell it. You were going to gut my hard work, liquidate the asset, and buy a penthouse in River North." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The guests were beginning to understand that this wasn't a gift presentation. It was an autopsy. "I didn't want to burden you with a house you hated," I said. "I didn't want you to suffer through living in a place that wasn't up to your aesthetic standards. So I fixed the problem. I looked at the technician. Next slide, I commanded. The screen flickered. The beautiful photo of the house remained, but a massive graphic slammed onto the image with a digital thud. It was a stamp, bright red, aggressive, final, sold. Underneath the stamp was a copy of a wire transfer receipt dated that very morning. The numbers were large enough for the people in the back row to read. $2,200,000. Brittany let out a strangled sound. Her knees buckled and she grabbed the altar railing to stay upright. You sold it, she stammered. This morning, I said. Cash deal. The buyers were very eager. They loved the brass fixtures. But that money, she choked out, her eyes darting between the screen and me. That is our money. That was for us. You said you had a check. I do have a check, I said. I pointed to the bottom line of the receipt on the screen. Beneficiary St. Jude Children Research Hospital. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. I donated every single penny, I said, my voice ringing with finality. $2.2 million. Sent to the orphanage and the Children's Hospital Fund at 9 a.m. today. I looked at Dante. He looked like he was going to be sick. He was swaying on his feet, his face a mask of gray shock. He realized that the safety net hadn't just been cut. It had been incinerated. Why, he whispered. Why would you do that? Because I wanted the money to go to children who actually appreciate a roof over their heads. I roared, my anger finally breaking through the calm surface. I wanted it to go to people who are fighting for their lives, not people who are fighting for a better view of the skyline. Brittany screamed. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was the shriek of a wounded animal, a banshee wail of pure entitlement being ripped away. You promised, she yelled, lunging toward me. You crazy old man, that was my house. You promised it to us. You cannot just give it away. It is mine. She tried to run up the steps, her hands clawing at the air as if she could grab the house out of the screen and pull it back into reality. It was never yours, I shouted back, stepping into her path. It was mine. It was my sweat. It was my money. And I will burn it to ash before I let an ungrateful parasite like you touch a single brick of it. She stopped inches from me, breathing hard, her face twisted into something ugly and raw. You are evil, she hissed. You are a spiteful, jealous old man. You did this just to hurt us. I did this to free you, I said, cold as ice. You wanted a modern life, Brittany. You wanted no baggage. Well, now you have it. No house, no deed, no inheritance. You are free to build your own empire. Let us see how far you get without my foundation to stand on. She looked at the screen one last time at the red sold stamp that marked the end of her ambitions. Then she looked at Dante. Do something, she screamed at him, hitting him in the chest. He gave our money away. Do something, you coward. Dante just stood there, staring at the screen, staring at the receipt for the donation. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked at the numbers. $2 million, gone, given to strangers. I watched them. I watched the greed turn into panic. I watched the realization sink in that the well was truly dry, and I felt nothing but a grim satisfaction. I had one more gift to give, one more slide in the deck. The house was the shelter, but now it was time to take away the love. I raised the microphone again. Do not worry, I said to the silent room. I know you are disappointed. You wanted a honeymoon too. You wanted the Maldives. I looked at Tiffany. I didn't pay for the Maldives, I said, but I did pay for a private investigator, and he found something much more interesting than a beach. I signaled the technician. Next slide. The image of the house vanished, and the room went dark for the final act. The silence that followed the revelation of the sold house was heavy, but it was fragile. It was the kind of silence that comes before a scream. Julian stood at the bottom of the stage stairs, his face a roadmap of ruin. He looked at the screen where the red sold stamp was still burning into his retinas, and then he looked at me. For a moment, I saw the child I had raised. I saw the confusion and the hurt. But then I saw the entitlement snap back into place. He didn't see a father trying to teach him a lesson. He saw a thief who had stolen his birthright. The shock morphed into a blind, white-hot rage. You cannot do this! He screamed, his voice cracking under the strain. You spiteful old man! That was mine. He lunged. He didn't walk. He scrambled up the marble steps, his expensive tuxedo shoes slipping on the polished stone. He was coming for the microphone. He was coming to silence me. He wanted to tear the remote from my hand and smash the screen as if destroying the image would somehow bring the house back. He reached me in 2 strides, his hand clawing for the lapel of my jacket. He was younger than me by 40 years. He was stronger. But he was frantic and I was calm. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just looked him in the eye with the cold disappointment that only a parent can feel. "Security," I said into the mic, my voice calm but amplified to a boom that shook the walls. 2 of my hired men stepped out from the wings. They were large, silent professionals who didn't care about wedding etiquette. They intercepted Julian before he could touch me. One of them grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back with practiced ease. Julian let out a yelp of pain and indignation. "Let me go!" he shouted, struggling against the grip. "This is my wedding. Get your hands off me!" He looked at me, his eyes wild. "Dad, stop this. Stop this right now. You made your point. You sold the house. Fine. You ruined the surprise. Are you happy? Now get off the stage and let us salvage what is left of this day." I looked down at him. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about a house. He thought this was a tantrum. He didn't realize it was an execution. "I am not done, Julian," I said softly. "I am not done because you are not just a greedy son. You are a fool." I turned to the crowd. The guests were frozen in their seats. The Vanderbilts in the front row looked like wax figures melting under the stage lights. They were terrified. They knew I had more. They knew I wasn't just pulling threads, I was unraveling the whole tapestry. "You wanted a honeymoon," I said into the microphone. "You sent me a bill for $100,000 for a trip to the Maldives. You wanted paradise." I looked at Brittany. She was still standing near the altar, clutching the railing, her face pale. She wasn't looking at Julian. She was looking at the best man, Michael Johnson. Michael was standing to the left of the altar in his matching tuxedo. He was Julian's best friend since college, the brother he never had, the man who had given the toast at the rehearsal dinner about loyalty and brotherhood. He was sweating. He was looking at the exit, calculating the distance. I walked over to the edge of the stage near him. "Hello, Michael," I said. He flinched. "Mr. Coleman?" he stammered. "You have been a good friend to Julian, haven't you?" I asked. "You have been there for him. You have helped him with everything, including his fiancée." Michael's face turned gray. I pointed the remote at the screen. "My son wanted to go to the Maldives," I told the crowd, but his bride had other travel plans. I pressed the button. The picture of the house vanished. The screen went black for a heartbeat, and then it lit up with an image that made the air in the room turn solid. It was a photograph, high resolution, crystal clear. It was taken through the windshield of a car. A luxury SUV parked in a secluded lane near the lakefront. The faces were unmistakable. It was Brittany, and it was Michael. They were not talking. They were not holding hands. They were entangled in a passionate embrace, the kind that leaves no room for interpretation. Brittany's head was thrown back, her eyes closed. Michael's hand was tangled in her hair. It was a moment of raw, illicit intimacy frozen in time and projected 20 feet high for 300 people to see. The sound in the room was not a gasp this time. It was a low, guttural moan of shock, a collective, "Oh my God," that rippled from the front row to the back. But I wasn't finished. A picture is worth 1,000 words, but I had the words too. I hit the button again. The photo slid to the side. Next to it, a text message conversation appeared. It was the thread I had downloaded from the iPad. The white bubbles were Brittany. The blue bubbles were Michael. The text was large, legible, undeniable. The date was 3 days ago. "Brittany, I cannot wait for this to be over. The wedding is just a show. Michael, just hold on, babe. Get him to sign the deed. Brittany, I know. Once I marry that idiot and get the house, I am out. I will file for divorce in 6 months. We take the asset and leave him with the debt, Michael. I love you. Keep your eyes on the prize, Brittany. I love you too. He is just a means to an end." I read the words aloud, my voice heavy with disgust. "Once I marry that idiot, I am out." I lowered the microphone. The silence that followed was the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a world ending. I looked at Julian. The security guard had let go of his arm. He didn't need to hold him anymore. Julian wasn't going to attack me. He wasn't going to run. He was paralyzed. He stood there staring up at the screen. He read the words. He looked at the picture. He looked at the date, 3 days ago. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, like a rusted machine. He looked at Brittany. She was standing there, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. But she wasn't looking at him with apology. She was looking at him with fear. She had been caught. The mask was gone, and underneath was just a thief who had failed the heist. Then Julian turned to Michael, his best friend, his best man, the man who was holding the ring in his pocket. Michael couldn't meet his eyes. He looked at his shoes. He looked at the ceiling. He looked anywhere but at the man he had stabbed in the back. Julian made a sound. It was a small broken noise, a whimper. It was the sound of a dog that had been kicked by the hand that fed it. "You," he whispered. He walked toward Michael. He didn't run. He walked with a staggering, uneven gait like the floor was tilting under his feet. "You," he said louder. Michael took a step back, raising his hands. "Julian, listen, man. It is not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," Julian screamed. The sound tore his throat. "It is exactly what it looks like. You are sleeping with her. You are stealing from me." He lunged. He grabbed Michael by the lapels of his tuxedo and slammed him against the flower arch. The white roses rained down on them, petals falling like snow on a grave. "How could you?" Julian sobbed, shaking him. "You are my brother. You were supposed to be my brother." Michael didn't fight back. He just took it limp with shame. I watched them. I watched the two men who had been boys together playing video games in my basement now destroying each other on an altar of lies. And then Julian turned to Brittany. He let go of Michael and spun around. Brittany was backing away. "Julian," she pleaded. "Julian, please. It was a mistake. I was scared." "A mistake?" Julian laughed. A harsh, hysterical sound. "You called me an idiot. You said I was a means to an end." He pointed at the screen at the text message that loomed over them like a judgment from God. "You never loved me," he said, his voice breaking into pieces. "You never wanted me. You just wanted the house. You just wanted the money." He looked at me. He looked at his father standing on the stage holding the remote control that had detonated his life. And in his eyes I saw the realization finally hit home. He realized that I hadn't ruined his life. I had saved it. I had dragged the cancer out into the light before it could kill him. I had shown him the knife before it went into his back. He looked at the Vanderbilts. Patricia was sobbing into her husband's shoulder. They knew it was over. The golden goose was dead. The scam was exposed. Julian looked back at me. He looked small. He looked stripped. "Dad," he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't step down to comfort him. I didn't offer a hug. He needed to feel this. He needed to feel the cold wind of the truth on his skin. He needed to know what it felt like to be loved for your utility and not for your soul. I raised the microphone one last time. "There is your freedom, Julian," I said. "I gave you the greatest gift a father can give. I gave you the truth." I looked at the crowd. They were shell-shocked. They were witnessing a tragedy, a Greek drama playing out in real time. "The wedding is over," I announced. "The bride has other plans. The groom has a lot of thinking to do. And the father of the groom—" I paused. I looked at the exit. "The father of the groom is disappearing, just like he promised." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. The feedback squealed one last time and then died. I walked down the stairs. I walked past Julian, who was sinking to his knees on the marble floor, weeping into his hands. I walked past Michael, who was adjusting his suit, trying to regain a shred of dignity. I walked past Brittany, who was staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I walked down the aisle. The guests parted for me. They didn't look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with fear. They looked at me with awe. They saw the man who had burned down the castle to save the prince. I walked out of the ballroom and into the lobby. The air was cool. The music was gone. I didn't look back. I had kept my word. I had vanished. But I had left a fire burning behind me. A fire that would burn away the lies, the greed, and the fake friends. It was up to Julian to decide if he wanted to rise from the ashes or burn with them. I walked out to the valet stand. I handed the boy my ticket. "My car," I said. "The rolls." He ran to get it. I stood there looking at the sunset. It was a beautiful evening. A perfect evening for a new beginning, or a spectacular end. The chaos on the stage was a living thing breathing and pulsing with the collective shock of 300 people. Julian was broken, huddled against the flower arch like a child hiding from a storm. Brittany was frozen, her eyes wide and vacant, staring at the evidence of her infidelity glowing on the massive screens. But the St. James family, the so-called aristocracy of the East Coast, was not ready to go down without a fight. They were cornered rats, and rats bite when they are trapped. Arthur St. James surged forward from the front row. His face was a mottled map of purple rage and white panic. He didn't look like a distinguished businessman anymore. He looked like a brawler in a tuxedo that was suddenly too tight for his heaving chest. Vivian was right behind him, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Her face twisted into a mask of indignation that she wore like armor. They rushed the stairs, pushing past the stunned security guards who were too busy watching the screens to stop them. Arthur grabbed the railing and hauled himself up onto the altar, his heavy breathing amplified by the proximity to the microphone I still held. "You liar!" Arthur screamed, his voice cracking, spraying spittle into the air. "This is slander. This is defamation of character. I will sue you into the ground. You think you can ruin my daughter's reputation with your Photoshop tricks and your lies." He pointed a shaking finger at me, his eyes bulging. "You are a jealous, bitter old man," he spat. "You are jealous because your son chose us. He chose class. He chose pedigree, and you couldn't stand it. You had to drag us down into the gutter with you." Vivian joined him, clutching her husband's arm, looking out at the crowd with a desperate, manic smile. "Do not listen to him," she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. "This man is insane. He is senile. He has been harassing us for months. These photos are fake. The texts are fake. It is all a sick fantasy from a sick mind." She turned to me, her eyes venomous. "We are the St. James family," she hissed. "We are pillars of this community. And you are nobody. You are a nobody with a little bit of money and a lot of hate. I will have you arrested. I will take every dime you have left for emotional distress." I watched them unravel. It was fascinating in a morbid way. They were standing in the wreckage of their own making, surrounded by proof of their bankruptcy and their daughter's betrayal, and their instinct was still to attack. They still believed that if they screamed loud enough, if they invoked their name with enough arrogance, the world would bend to their reality. I didn't step back. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at Arthur. I looked at the pocket of his expensive suit jacket, the one that was bulging slightly more than it should. "You want to talk about the law, Arthur?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, a rock in the middle of their rapids. "You want to talk about arrests? You want to talk about taking things that don't belong to you?" "I do," Arthur bellowed. "I want the police here now. I want you in handcuffs." "Be careful what you wish for, Arthur," I said softly. I looked past him toward the main doors of the ballroom. The guests turned to follow my gaze. The heavy oak doors swung open again. But this time, it wasn't the Economic Crimes Unit. It was the local precinct detectives, 2 of them, men I had met with 3 days ago, men who had seen the video evidence from my home security system. They walked down the aisle. They didn't run. They didn't need to. Their presence was heavy, official, undeniable. They walked with the steady pace of justice that has already made up its mind. Arthur stopped screaming. He followed the line of my gaze. He saw the badges. He saw the guns on their hips. For a second, a flicker of hope crossed his face. He thought they were here for me. He thought his threats had worked. "Officers," he shouted, waving his arms. "Over here! Arrest this man. He is disturbing the peace. He is slandering my family." The detectives walked right past the front row. They walked up the steps of the altar. They stopped in front of Arthur St. James. Arthur St. James, the lead detective, asked, his voice flat. "Yes," Arthur said, puffing out his chest. "I am Arthur St. James, and I demand you remove this man immediately." "Arthur St. James," the detective repeated, pulling a pair of metal cuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for grand larceny and the theft of antiquities." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was heavier than the silence after the photos. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hovering at the top of the track. Arthur laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Larceny," he sputtered. "That is absurd. I am a wealthy man. What could I possibly have stolen?" I stepped forward. I leaned into the microphone. "You stole from me, Arthur," I said. Arthur spun around. You have nothing worth stealing." I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. "Remember the dinner, Arthur?" I asked. "The dinner at my house 3 weeks ago. The dinner where you insulted my food and my furniture. The dinner where you said my home smelled like the ghetto." Arthur blinked. He remembered. I could see it in his eyes. You went to the bathroom, I continued. But you didn't go to the bathroom. You went into my study. You opened my display case. Arthur's face drained of color. His hand instinctively went to his pocket. You took 3 coins, I said. 3 Spanish doubloons from the 1715 fleet. Gold. Rare. Worth about $50,000 each. Lies. Arthur screamed, backing away. I never touched your things. I didn't just watch you, Arthur, I said. I prepared for you. You see, I knew you were a thief. I knew you were broke. I knew you were desperate. So I left the cabinet unlocked. I left the coins right in the front. I paused, letting the words sink in. But what you didn't know, Arthur, is that those coins were bait. They are marked. They have micro RFID chips embedded in the casing. I can track them anywhere in the world. I pulled out my phone. I opened an app. I held the screen up so Arthur could see it. A bright red dot was pulsing on a map. And right now, I said, looking him dead in the eye, that dot is beeping right inside your jacket pocket. Arthur's hand froze halfway to his chest. He looked at the detectives. He looked at the crowd. He looked at his wife. Vivian gasped. Arthur, she whispered. Tell him he is lying. Tell him you didn't take them. Arthur couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He reached into his pocket. His hand came out trembling. In his palm sat 3 heavy gold coins. The crowd erupted. It wasn't shock anymore. It was revulsion. It was the sound of a society realizing they had been letting a pickpocket sit at their table. He stole them, someone shouted from the back. He stole from the groom father. He is a common thief, another voice yelled. The detective stepped forward. He took the coins from Arthur's shaking hand and dropped them into an evidence bag. Then he spun Arthur around. Hands behind your back, the detective ordered. Arthur slumped. The fight went out of him. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a small, pathetic man who had been living a lie for so long he had forgotten what the truth felt like. The cuffs clicked shut. The sound was final, metallic, cold. Vivian screamed, No! You can't do this. We are the St. Jameses. We have immunity. We have status. You have nothing, Vivian, I said. The second detective turned to her. Mrs. St. James, he said, we also have a warrant for your arrest. Conspiracy to commit fraud and possession of stolen property. We found the silver candlesticks from Mr. Coleman's house in your handbag during the security check at the gate. Vivian's eyes rolled back in her head. She didn't faint, but she swayed, grabbing the podium to stay upright. You checked my bag, she whispered. We check everyone's bag when there is a felony theft report filed, the detective said. Turn around, ma'am. They cuffed her right there on the stage next to her husband. The 2 pillars of society, the judges of taste and class, bound in steel like common criminals. I watched them. I watched the tears streaming down Vivian's face, cutting through the layers of expensive powder. I watched Arthur staring at the floor, unable to lift his head. You called me a peasant, I said to them, my voice low. You mocked my life. You mocked my work. But at least I never stole a dime. At least I never had to look at myself in the mirror and see a thief. I looked at the detectives. Take them away, I said. Get them out of my sight. They are ruining the view. The detectives began to march them down the stairs. The crowd parted, but this time there was no respect. There was no awe. There was only disgust. People pulled their feet back as if afraid of being touched by the contagion of failure. I saw a woman in the 3rd row, a friend of Vivian, reach out and snatch her purse off the chair as they passed, as if afraid Vivian might try to steal it with her teeth. I saw Richard Vanderbilt, the cousin, turn his back on them. They were paraded down the long center aisle, past the empty chairs, past the ruined wedding cake, past the daughter they had tried to sell. Brittany didn't look at them. She was still staring at the screen at the photo of her betrayal. She didn't move to help her parents. She didn't cry out for them. She let them go. She let them be dragged out into the harsh light of day alone. I stood on the stage, the master of the house, the owner of the castle. I watched the doors swing shut behind them. The sound echoed through the hall, a final punctuation mark on the sentence of their lives. I looked at Dante. He was still on his knees, but he was looking at the doors too. He had watched his in-laws, the people he had desperate to impress, the people he had betrayed his father for, be carried away in handcuffs. He looked back at me. His eyes were empty. The illusion was gone. The gold paint had peeled away, revealing the rust underneath. I am sorry I whispered not to him but to the air. I am sorry it had to be this way, but you had to see, you had to know. I turned to the crowd one last time. They were silent, waiting. They knew the show wasn't over. There was still one more bill to pay, one more account to settle. I looked at the venue manager who was standing by the wall looking pale and terrified. He was holding a clipboard. He was holding the final invoice for the reception. I beckoned him over. "Come here, son," I said. "Let us talk about the bill." Because even though I had exposed the fraud, even though I had destroyed the marriage, I was still a businessman. And in business you always close the loop. The wedding was over. But the reckoning for Dante was just beginning, and I was about to hand him the receipt. Here is part 13 of the story written in the first-person perspective of Thaddeus Coleman, following the established tone and plot outline. The doors closed behind the St. James clan, sealing their shame outside. The ballroom was quieter now, but it was not peaceful. It was the silence of a bomb site. The guests who remained were frozen, unsure if they were allowed to breathe. Julian was still on his knees, staring at the spot where his best friend had been. Brittany was sobbing softly, a heap of white lace and ruin. But business is business, and the bill always comes due. The venue manager, a man named Mr. Sterling, who had been hovering nervously by the service entrance, straightened his tie. He looked at the chaos. He looked at the empty altar. Then he looked at the clipboard in his hand. He took a deep breath and walked toward me. "Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation." I looked at him. I knew exactly what the situation was. "The wedding is canceled, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice echoing in the hollow room. "The party is over. I understand, sir," Mr. Sterling said. "But the services, the catering, the floral arrangements, they have already been provided. The contract states that full payment is due upon commencement of the event." He held out the clipboard. "The outstanding balance is $150,000, sir." He tried to hand the clipboard to me. It was a natural reflex. I was the father. I was the man in the suit who had just revealed he owned the building. I was the man with the black card. I didn't take the clipboard. I stepped back. I put my hands in my pockets. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice loud enough for Julian to hear, "you are mistaken. I am not the client." Mr. Sterling blinked, confused. "But, sir, you are the father." "I was the father," I corrected him. "But as of 10 minutes ago, I am just a ghost." I turned to look at Julian. He had lifted his head. He was watching us, his eyes red and swollen. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in a supermarket. "My son and his fiancée made a very specific request," I said, addressing the room. "They told me the greatest gift I could give them was to disappear. They said I was old. They said I was ugly. They said I messed up their aesthetic." I walked slowly toward Julian. "Well, son, I am granting your wish. I am disappearing. And ghosts do not pay bills. Strangers do not cover six-figure tabs for people who hate them." I pointed at Julian. "This is your party, Julian. These are your guests. This is your mess." I turned back to Mr. Sterling. "Give the bill to the groom." Mr. Sterling hesitated. He looked at me, then at Julian. He saw the difference. He saw the power on one side and the pathetic ruin on the other. But he had a business to run. He walked over to Julian. "Mr. Coleman," the manager said, holding out the invoice, "I need to settle this account. Now." Julian stared at the paper. $150,000. He didn't have it. He never had it. He had been counting on the deed transfer. He had been counting on selling the house I was supposed to give him. He had been counting on my death. I cannot," Julian stammered. "My dad, he usually handles—" "Your dad is gone," I interrupted him, my voice sharp. "Thaddeus Coleman, the ATM is out of service. You wanted to be a big man, Julian. You wanted the penthouse. You wanted the high life. Well, the high life costs money. Pay the man." Julian's hands shook as he reached into his tuxedo jacket. He pulled out his wallet. It was a sleek leather thing I had bought him for his birthday. He pulled out a credit card. It was a platinum card, a card attached to the account I had funded for years. "I will pay it," he whispered, his voice sounding thin and brittle. "I will pay it, and then I will never speak to you again." He handed the card to Mr. Sterling. "Run it," he said, trying to muster a shred of dignity. Mr. Sterling took the card. He pulled a portable card reader from his pocket. He inserted the chip. The machine beeped, a harsh, dissonant sound. Mr. Sterling looked at the screen. He frowned. He pulled the card out and wiped it on his sleeve. He inserted it again. Beep. Declined, Mr. Sterling said. Julian's face flushed. That is impossible, he said. There is a $50,000 limit on that card. Run it again. It is declined, sir, Mr. Sterling said, his voice losing its politeness. Do you have another form of payment? Julian pulled out another card, and another. He handed them over one by one. Beep, declined. Beep, declined. Beep, declined. He stood there holding a handful of useless plastic. He looked at me. Panic was starting to set in, real panic, not the theatrical kind he used to manipulate me. Dad, he said, his voice rising. What did you do? Why aren't they working? I smiled. It was the smile of a man who had tied every loose end. I told you, Julian, I said. I activated the Ghost Protocol. Ghost Protocol, he whispered. I closed the accounts, I said. All of them. The trust fund, the emergency savings, the joint checking, even the account linked to your studio. I liquidated the assets, I paid off my debts, and I donated the rest. I took a step closer. You are broke, Julian. You don't have a cent to your name. The Porsche in the parking lot. It is repossessed. The equipment in your studio, sold. The clothes on your back. They are probably the only thing you own, and I am pretty sure you put those on a card that just got canceled. Julian dropped the cards. They clattered onto the marble floor like plastic rain. You left me with nothing, he screamed. Nothing. I left you with your freedom, I said. You wanted to be independent. You wanted to be free of my influence. Congratulations. You are free. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. He wasn't interested in the family drama. He was interested in his money. Mr. Coleman, he said, stepping closer to Julian, his posture threatening. If you cannot pay, I will have to call the authorities. Theft of services is a felony. Julian looked at Brittany. She was sitting on the steps of the altar, staring at her phone. She hadn't moved. She hadn't offered to help. Babe, he said, his voice desperate. Babe, your cards. Use your cards. We can sort this out later. Brittany looked up. Her eyes were cold, dead. My cards are maxed out, she said flatly. You know that. You said you would pay them off after the wedding, but we have to do something. Julian pleaded. They are going to arrest me. Then let them. Brittany said. Julian reeled back as if she had punched him. I watched the realization wash over him. He was alone, truly alone. The woman he loved didn't care. His best friend had betrayed him. His father had finally stopped saving him. He looked at me one last time. There was no arrogance left, no pride, just the terrified look of a boy who had wandered too far into the dark woods. Dad, help me, he whispered. Please. I looked at him. I felt the old instinct rising, the urge to fix it, the urge to write the check. But then I looked at the coffee stain on the floor of my memory. I heard the words, old and ugly. I saw the text messages. I am sorry, sir, I said to Mr. Sterling. I do not know this man. I turned my back on him. Call the police, Mr. Sterling, I said over my shoulder. I believe that is standard procedure for vagrants who try to crash a party. I walked away. Behind me, I heard Julian sobbing. I heard Mr. Sterling on his radio calling for the police. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I walked toward the exit, toward the fresh air, toward the rest of my life. I had paid the bill, but the cost was my son. And as I walked out into the sunlight, I knew it was a price I had to pay. Because sometimes you have to let the tower fall so you can see the sky again. The wedding was over. The marriage was dead. And Julian Coleman was about to learn the hardest lesson of all. You can't put a price on loyalty, but you certainly have to pay for betrayal. The air in the ballroom was suffocating, thick with the smell of dying flowers and imminent ruin. I stood near the heavy oak doors, my hand resting on the brass handle, but I did not push it open yet. I needed to see the final act. I needed to see the moment when the parasite realized the host was dead. Mr. Sterling was speaking rapidly into his phone, his eyes darting between the exits and the groom, ensuring no one fled before the authorities arrived. Julian stood alone in the center of the dance floor. His tuxedo was disheveled, his face a map of absolute terror. He looked around the room, searching for a lifeline, searching for anyone who could pull him out of the grave he had dug. His eyes landed on Brittany. She was standing near the overturned wedding cake, her white dress stained with frosting and dirt. She looked like a statue of misery. But unlike Julian, whose fear was rooted in the loss of his father, hers was rooted in the loss of her future. She was calculating. Even now, amidst the wreckage of her wedding, I could see the gears turning behind her tear-filled eyes. She was doing the math. Julian stumbled toward her. He moved like a drunk man, his legs heavy with the weight of his debts. He reached out for her, his hands shaking. "Brittany," he choked out, his voice wet and desperate. "Brittany, baby, please. You have to help me." He tried to grab her hand, but she snatched it away as if he were burning. She took a step back, her heels clicking sharply on the marble. Her face changed. The mask of the grieving bride slipped away, revealing the cold, hard features of a woman who had just realized she bet on a losing horse. "Help you," she spat. Her voice was not loud, but in the silence of the empty hall it sounded like a gunshot. "Why would I help you? You are nothing." Julian froze. He looked at her confused, as if she were speaking a language he did not understand. But we are married," he stammered. "We are a team. I love you." "Love?" Brittany laughed. It was a harsh, jagged sound that scraped against the nerves. "You think this was about love? You think I stood up there and promised my life to you because of love?" She stepped closer to him, her eyes blazing with a fury that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with a failed investment. "I married you because you were supposed to be my exit strategy," she hissed. "You were supposed to be the golden ticket. You told me you were rich. You told me your father was a silent partner in the city. You told me we would live in the penthouse. I thought I was," Julian whispered. "I thought he would give it to me." "You thought," she mocked him, sneering. "You are a 32-year-old man, Julian. You don't think. You just take. And now you have nothing to take." She looked him up and down, her gaze traveling over his torn suit, his scuffed shoes, his trembling hands. She looked at him with the same expression one might look at a piece of roadkill. "Look at you," she said. "You are pathetic. You are broke. You have a mountain of debt. You have criminal charges waiting for you outside that door, and you have a father who just exposed you for the fraud you are." She reached for her left hand. She clawed at her ring finger. The engagement ring, the one I had paid $20,000 for because the first one wasn't big enough, flashed under the chandeliers. She yanked it off, scratching her skin in her haste. "I don't want this," she screamed. "I don't want your name. I don't want your debt. And I certainly don't want you." She threw the ring. It was a violent motion. The diamond arced through the air, catching the light one last time before it struck Julian square in the chest. It bounced off his lapel and skittered across the floor, spinning like a top before coming to rest in a puddle of spilled champagne. Julian stared at the ring. He stared at the empty space on her finger. "Brittany, please," he begged, falling to his knees. "I can fix this. I can talk to him. I can make him understand." "You can't fix anything," she yelled, her voice rising to a shriek. "You are useless. You are a useless, broke liar. I only married you because your father was rich. That is it. That is the only reason. I tolerated your touch, I tolerated your stupidity, and I tolerated your family because I thought there was a payoff at the end." She leaned down, her face inches from his so he could see the absolute loathing in her eyes. But the check bounced Julian. "And so did you." She straightened up, smoothing her dress with a jerky, angry motion. She looked around the room, realizing for the first time that her parents were gone, dragged away in handcuffs, that her lover Michael had fled, and that she was alone with the man she despised. "I am leaving," she announced. "I am going to find a lawyer. I am going to annul this farce before the ink is even dry. Do not follow me. Do not call me. If I ever see you again, I will spit in your face." She turned on her heel. She grabbed her purse from the table, clutching it like a shield. She walked toward the side exit, walking past the stunned venue staff, past the waiting police officers. She walked with her head high, not because she had dignity, but because she refused to show weakness to the man she had just destroyed. Julian stayed on the floor. He was on his knees in the middle of the debris of his life. He looked at the door where she had exited. He looked at the ring lying in the puddle. He looked at the empty altar where I had stood just minutes ago. The weight of it all finally crushed him. The facade he had built for 10 years, the lies, the posturing, the arrogance, it all shattered. He let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a howl. a long, agonizing wail of a man who has lost everything. He slumped forward, his hands hitting the floor, his forehead resting on the cold stone. His shoulders shook with violent sobs. He had no wife. She had never loved him. He had no father. I had washed my hands of him. He had no money. The accounts were closed. He had no home. The locks were changed. And he had debt. Massive, crushing debt owed to men who broke bones for a living and to a venue manager who was currently waving police officers into the room. I watched him from the doorway. I watched my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had put through Harvard, crumble into a pile of broken ambition. A part of me wanted to go to him. A part of me wanted to lift him up and tell him it would be okay. That was the father in me. The father who remembered the little boy who was afraid of the dark. But the man in me, the man who knew the cost of respect, stayed put. I knew that if I went to him now, if I saved him from this pain, he would never learn. He would never grow. He would wipe his eyes, blame the world, and start the con all over again. He needed this rock bottom. He needed to feel the cold, hard floor beneath him. He needed to know that when you burn a bridge, you have to learn to swim. "Officer, that is him," Mr. Sterling said, pointing at Julian. "That is Mr. King. He is the one responsible for the bill." Two police officers walked onto the dance floor. They approached the weeping man on the ground. They didn't offer comfort. They pulled him up by his arms. "Dante King, you are under arrest for theft of services and fraud." They pulled his hands behind his back. I heard the click of the cuffs. It was the second time today I had heard that sound applied to my family. Julian looked up as they dragged him away. His eyes scanned the room one last time. They found me standing by the door. He didn't scream this time. He didn't beg. He just looked at me. His eyes were hollow, empty wells of grief. He looked at me, and he saw the man he could have been if he had just been honest. I held his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just nodded once. A final acknowledgement. A goodbye. The officers marched him out. He vanished through the doors, leaving nothing behind but a ruined party and an unpaid bill. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the night. The air was cool and clean. The stars were out. I walked to my truck. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The burden of my son's lies was gone. The weight of his pretense was lifted. I was alone, but I was free. I started the engine. I had a long drive ahead of me. I had a farm to buy. I had a new life to build. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the work. I stood over the wreckage of the wedding, looking down at the microphone lying on the marble floor. It was scuffed and dented, a piece of electronic debris in a room full of shattered lives. The police officers were holding Julian near the exit, waiting for the transport van. He was slumped against the doorframe. His tuxedo jacket torn his face, a mask of snot and tears. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment to stop, but the punishment was just beginning. I bent down. My joints popped a sound like dry wood in a fire. I picked up the microphone. I brushed a white rose petal off the grill. It was heavy in my hand, cold and final. I signaled the sound engineer one last time. He was a young kid, eyes wide with terror and awe, but he nodded and pushed the fader up. The speakers hummed to life. A low static hiss filled the ballroom, silencing the murmurs of the few guests who were still too shocked to leave. "Wait," I said, my voice booming through the hall, stopping the police officers in their tracks. "Just 1 minute, officers. I have a final toast to give." The officers looked at me. They saw the way I carried myself. They saw the fear in the eyes of the people around me. They nodded and held Julian there. He looked up at me, his eyes hopeful for a split second, thinking, maybe, just maybe, I was going to save him after all. I looked at him. I looked at the son I had carried on my shoulders at parades, the son I had taught to tie his shoes, the son I had built an empire for. And then I looked at the man who had let his fiancée call me ugly, the man who had sent me an invoice for his love. "You asked for a gift, Julian?" I said, my voice steady and calm, not angry anymore, just tired. "You and your wife made a specific request. You told me in the dressing room of that tailor shop that the greatest gift I could give you would be to disappear. I walked to the edge of the stage. You said I was old. You said I was an embarrassment. You said I ruined the aesthetic." Julian sobbed, a wet, pathetic sound. "Dad, stop, please." "I am not stopping," I said. "I am delivering. You wanted me gone. You wanted the Coleman name to be scrubbed clean of the dirt and the struggle. You wanted to be a king without the history." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a lighter. It was an old Zippo, scratched and worn. I flicked it open. The flame danced in the air-conditioned breeze. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a photo. It was the one from his wallet, the one he had thrown away in the trash, the one of us at his graduation where he had scribbled over my face. I held the photo up. "You erased me, Julian," I said. "You tried to edit your life. Well, I am going to finish the job for you." I touched the flame to the corner of the photo. It curled and blackened the fire, eating the image of the father and son. I dropped it onto the stone floor and watched it burn until it was just ash. "I am disappearing," I said. "Thaddeus Coleman. The father is gone. He died the moment you sent me that bill." I looked out at the room, at the ruins of the Vanderbilt dynasty, at the empty chairs, at the stain of greed that covered everything. "From this moment on," I said, my voice rising, filling every corner of the castle, "you are not a Coleman. You do not carry my name. You do not carry my legacy. You are just Julian, a man with no past and no future." I looked him dead in the eye. "I am taking my name back, son. It is too heavy for you to carry." I dropped the microphone. This time I didn't watch it fall. I turned and walked away. The feedback shrieked a high, piercing wail that sounded like a heart monitor flatlining. I walked down the stairs. I walked down the aisle. The remaining guests scrambled out of my way, pressing themselves against the pillars, afraid to touch me, afraid to catch the fire that was burning inside me. I walked past Julian. He screamed my name. He lunged against the cuffs, trying to grab my pant leg, trying to anchor himself to the rock he had tried to crush. "Dad, don't leave me." "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I didn't break stride. I didn't look down. I stepped over the train of Tiffany's dress, which lay on the floor like a shroud. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the evening light. The air was sweet. It smelled of pine and impending rain. The valet stand was chaos. Cars were backed up. Guests were trying to flee the scene of the crime. I walked up to the podium. The head valet, the young man who had sneered at my truck earlier in the week, was sweating, trying to manage the keys. He saw me coming. He froze. He remembered me. He remembered the old man in the work boots, but he also remembered the way I had commanded the room. He saw the way I walked now. "Sir," he stammered. Your truck." I stopped. I looked at him. I smiled a slow, dangerous smile. "No, son," I said. "Not the truck." I reached into the pocket of my charcoal suit. I pulled out a key fob. It was heavy. It was leather and chrome. It had a symbol on it that meant only one thing: excellence. I tossed it to him. "The Phantom," I said. "It is parked in the owner's garage around the back. Bring it around." The valet caught the keys. He looked at the logo. The double R, Rolls-Royce. His mouth dropped open. "The Phantom," he whispered. "The black one, that is the one," I said, and wiped the seat off. "I do not want any dust on my suit." He ran. He ran like his life depended on it. I stood on the curb waiting. Behind me, the police were leading Julian and the Vanderbilts out the side exit, stuffing them into squad cars. I didn't turn around to watch. I had seen enough. A low hum vibrated the pavement. A sleek black beast rounded the corner. It was my car. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, extended wheelbase, midnight black with chrome rims that shone like mirrors. It moved with the silent grace of a shark. It was a car that cost $500,000, a car I had bought years ago and kept hidden in a climate-controlled garage waiting for a special occasion. This was a special occasion. This was a funeral. The valet pulled the car up to the curb. He jumped out and opened the rear door, bowing low. "Your car, Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice trembling with respect. I nodded. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $100 bill. I tucked it into his vest pocket. "Keep the change," I said, "and get a better job. You are terrible at judging character." I slid into the back seat. The leather was soft and cool. The interior smelled of wealth and silence. I pressed a button and the partition slid up, sealing me off from the world. I looked out the tinted window. I saw Julian's face pressed against the glass of the police car as it drove past. He saw the car. He saw the Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament. He saw me sitting in the back, bathed in the soft glow of the reading light. His eyes went wide. The realization hit him one final devastating time. He had chased an illusion of wealth, while the reality was standing right in front of him the whole time. He had thrown away a diamond to pick up a piece of glass. I tapped the glass of the window with my knuckle. A final goodbye. "Driver," I said into the intercom, "take me to the airport." "Where are we going, sir?" the driver asked. "South," I said. "Somewhere warm. Somewhere they don't know the name Coleman. Somewhere I can fish in peace." The car pulled away, gliding over the asphalt. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I was alone. I had no son. I had no house. But I had my dignity. I had my name. And for the first time in a long time, I had silence. The rearview mirror reflected the chateau shrinking in the distance, a castle of lies crumbling on the hill. I turned my head away. I was done looking back. The road was open, and I was driving. 3 months had passed since I walked out of the chateau and into my new life. 3 months of silence, 3 months of peace. But even thousands of miles away, sitting on the porch of a small cabin in the Smoky Mountains, I knew exactly what was happening in the city I left behind. I didn't need a crystal ball. I just needed to know the laws of physics. When a building has no foundation, it collapses. And Julian was in free fall. I learned the details later from Lucius. He kept tabs on the wreckage, not because I asked him to, but because he was thorough. Julian had lasted 2 weeks at his job after the wedding. The moment the news of his arrest hit the industry blogs, he was toxic. His agency dropped him. His clients canceled contracts. The polished director who used to bill $5,000 a day was suddenly untouchable. He was fired via email. His access badge didn't even work when he went to collect his things. Security escorted him out with a cardboard box of desk toys, just like he had tried to escort me out of his life. The eviction came next. Without my secret transfers covering the rent, the luxury apartment he was so proud of evicted him in record time. He didn't have a lease in his name that would hold up in court, not with his credit score cratering. He was on the street in 10 days. He didn't have friends to crash with. Michael was gone, hiding from his own shame. The entourage of hangers-on he had bought with expensive dinners vanished the moment the credit cards stopped working. So he ended up in his car, not the Porsche. The bank took that back the Monday after the wedding. He was sleeping in the back of an old station wagon he used to use for hauling equipment, a rusted beat-up thing that smelled of old fast food and despair. I can picture him, parked in the back lot of a 24-hour superstore, trying to sleep with his knees against his chest, shivering under a coat that used to be dry-cleaned weekly but was now stained and wrinkled. He was eating dollar store bread and drinking tap water from a bathroom sink. He was living the life of the people he used to mock, and in that darkness, in that cold metal box. He reached for the only lifeline he thought he had left. He tried to call me. I had changed my number the day I left Chicago. I destroyed the old SIM card and tossed the pieces into a river. But Julian didn't know that. He dialed the digits he had known his whole life. The digits he used to call when he wanted pizza money, when he wanted bail money, when he wanted a new lens for his camera. He probably held the phone to his ear, his hand shaking, praying for the ringtone, praying to hear my voice. Even if I was angry, even if I yelled, he just wanted to hear his father. But he didn't get a ring. "We are sorry. The number you have reached is not in service. Please check the number and try your call again." The mechanical voice of a machine. Cold, indifferent, final. He probably dialed it again. And again. Hoping it was a mistake. Hoping the network was down. But the message never changed. The line was dead. The connection was severed. He realized then that I wasn't just mad. I was gone. Desperation makes men do stupid things. It makes them chase ghosts. He drove to the old house on Coleman Avenue, the Victorian mansion, the wedding gift he had spat on. He probably thought I was bluffing about the sale. He probably thought I was sitting inside waiting for him to come crawling back so I could lecture him and then open the door. He thought it was a game of chicken and he was ready to blink. He pulled up to the curb. The house looked beautiful. The windows were glowing with warm yellow light. Smoke was curling from the chimney. It looked like safety. It looked like home. He ran up the steps. He didn't bother with his keys because he knew the locks would be changed, but he pounded on the heavy oak door. The brass knocker, the one Brittany had hated, clanged against the wood. "Dad!" he screamed. "Dad, let me in. I know you are in there. I am sorry. I am hungry. Please, open the door." The door opened, but it wasn't me. A young man stood there. He was wearing a flannel shirt and holding a baby in his arms. He looked tired, but happy. Behind him, a woman was laughing in the kitchen. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasted chicken. "Can I help you?" the young man asked, eyeing Julian's disheveled appearance warily. Julian froze. He looked past the man into the foyer. He saw a tricycle in the hallway. He saw pictures on the wall that weren't ours. "Where is Thaddeus?" Julian stammered. "Where is my father?" The man frowned. "There is no Thaddeus here, buddy. This is the St. Jude transition home. We moved in 3 months ago. Transition home." Julian stepped back as if he had been slapped. But this is my house," he whispered. "My father, he bought it for me." The man shifted the baby to his other hip. Look, pal, I don't know what to tell you. The deed belongs to the charity. The previous owner donated it. Now, if you don't mind, you are letting the cold air in. He closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut echoed in the night. Julian stood on the porch of the house he had rejected. He looked at the brass fixtures he had despised. He looked at the sturdy brick walls he had wanted to sell. It wasn't a museum, it was a sanctuary, and he was locked out. He walked back down the steps, his feet heavy. He looked up at the lighted windows one last time. He saw the silhouette of a family inside, a real family, people who appreciated the roof over their heads. He got into his car. He turned the key. The engine sputtered and died before catching on the second try. He didn't have anywhere to go. The city was a grid of closed doors. He drove away, leaving the warmth behind him. He was learning the lesson I had designed. He was learning that a house is not an asset to be flipped. It is a privilege to be earned. And tonight he would sleep in the cold, knowing that the only thing keeping him warm was the memory of what he threw away. If Julian's fall had been silent and tragic, Brittany's was loud and digital. The video of her confession in the janitorial closet didn't just stay in the ballroom. It migrated. It was uploaded, shared, tweeted, and reposted until it became a global phenomenon. She became a meme, the face of greed. The hashtags were brutal. Gold digger bride, the vulture. Within 48 hours, every brand she had ever tagged in a photo dropped her. The hair vitamin companies, the teeth whitening kits, the fast fashion labels, they all issued statements distancing themselves from her toxic brand. Her follower count didn't drop, it vanished. Her comments section became a war zone of insults and mockery. She tried to delete her accounts, but the internet is forever. The video was out there, looping endlessly, a digital scar she could never hide. She lost her apartment. She lost her friends, those shallow social climbers who scattered like roaches when the light turned on. She was toxic radioactive. No respectable man would date her. No respectable company would hire her. She was left with nothing but her looks, and even those were starting to fade under the stress of public humiliation. I knew all this because Lucius kept me informed. It wasn't gloating, it was due diligence. We needed to know where the threats were. 6 months had passed since the wedding. I was back in the city for a night attending the annual Children's Hospital Gala. It was the kind of event I used to avoid, but now, as the founder of the King Foundation, I had a responsibility to show my face. I wore a new tuxedo cut from midnight blue silk. I didn't look like a gardener. I looked like a man who could buy the building. I was standing near the bar, nursing a sparkling water, watching the crowd. The room was filled with the city elite. The same people who had been at the wedding were here pretending they hadn't witnessed the carnage. They nodded at me with respect now. They knew the score. I turned to the bar to set my glass down. "Hello, Thaddeus." The voice was soft, breathy, familiar. It was a voice designed to charm, to disarm, to manipulate. I turned slowly. Standing behind the bar, wearing a black vest and a white shirt that was unbuttoned just enough to be unprofessional, was Brittany. She looked different. The expensive highlights were gone, replaced by a duller box dye job. Her skin looked tired, the makeup a little too heavy, trying to cover the sleepless nights. But her eyes were the same. They were blue and calculating, scanning me like a barcode reader. She was working the event. The princess who wanted a penthouse was pouring gin and tonics for the people she used to try to impress. "Brittany," I said, my voice neutral. "I didn't think I would see you here," she said, leaning over the bar, pushing her chest forward. "I heard you were living on a farm now, playing cowboy." "I am," I said. "I just came into town to sign some checks." Checks. The word acted on her like a drug. Her pupils dilated. She licked her lips. "You look good, Thaddeus," she purred. "Really good. Distinguished. That suit fits you much better than the one at the wedding." I looked at her. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't hiding. She was hunting. She had spotted a target and she was reverting to her factory settings. Seduce, manipulate, extract. "You are working," I observed. "Yeah," she sighed, brushing a stray hair from her face. "It is temporary. Just until I get my business back off the ground. The internet, well, people have short memories. I will be back on top soon." She poured a glass of champagne and slid it toward me. It was on the house. "I miss you, Thaddeus," she said, lowering her voice to an intimate whisper. "I really do. I miss our talks." "We never talked, Brittany," I said. "You talked at me. You insulted me. That was a misunderstanding, she said quickly, waving her hand as if erasing history. I was stressed. I was under so much pressure from my parents. You know how they are. They forced me into that mindset. They made me think money was everything. She reached across the bar, trying to touch my hand. I moved it away. But you taught me a lesson, she continued, undeterred. You really did. When you stood up there on that stage, it was powerful. It was the most masculine thing I have ever seen. Julian was a boy. But you are a man. I felt a wave of nausea. She was flirting with me. She was flirting with the father of the man she destroyed. She was trying to pivot. If the son was a bust, maybe the father was open for business. It was depraved. It was desperate. You know, she whispered, leaning in so close I could smell the cheap perfume she was wearing now. I always thought Julian wasn't enough for me. He was weak. He didn't have your fire. He didn't have your strength. I think that is why I acted out. I was looking for a real man. She looked up at me through her lashes, a practiced look of vulnerability. I am sorry, Thaddeus. I am so sorry for everything. I was young and stupid, but I have changed. Look at me. I am working. I am humble. She paused, letting the silence hang, hoping I would fill it with forgiveness, or better yet, a credit card. I could really use a friend right now, she said softly. My landlord is threatening to evict me. My car broke down. I am all alone, and I know you are alone too. Maybe we could help each other. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had called me ugly, the woman who had called my son an idiot, the woman who had planned to put me in a nursing home and wait for me to die. She hadn't changed. She hadn't learned a single thing. She had just changed tactics. She was a virus looking for a new host. I picked up the champagne glass she had poured. She smiled, thinking I was accepting the offering. You are right, Brittany, I said. I am alone, and I like it that way. Her smile faltered. And you are right about something else, I continued. Julian was weak. He was weak because he let you into his life. He let a viper into his bed because he liked the way its scales shined. I set the glass back down on the bar with a sharp click. I didn't drink it. You are not humble, Brittany, I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the alcohol in the bottles behind her. You are hungry. There is a difference. You are not sorry you did it. You are sorry the check bounced. Thaddeus, please, she hissed, dropping the act, her eyes hardening. Do not be like that. I am drowning here. You have millions. You wouldn't even miss $5,000. Just help me out for old times' sake. Old times, I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. The old times where you planned to divorce my son and steal my house. Those old times. Yes, she snapped, desperate now. Yes. I was honest about that, wasn't I? At least I had a plan. Julian was a loser. He lied to me too. He told me he was rich. We were both playing a game. I just played it better until you got involved. So pay me. Pay me for my time. Pay me for the humiliation. Give me something. She was shaking. The mask was gone completely. She was just a grifter with her hand out demanding payment for a con that failed. I reached into my pocket. Brittany's eyes followed the movement. She held her breath. I pulled out a business card. It wasn't mine. It was one I had picked up in the lobby. It was for a temp agency, a place that hired day laborers for factory work. Here, I said, sliding it across the bar. What is this? She asked, staring at it. It is an opportunity, I said. They pay $15 an hour. It is hard work, packing boxes, standing on concrete, but it is honest. She looked at the card, then at me, her face twisted into a sneer. I am not working in a factory, she spat. I am a model. I am a brand. You are a bartender, I corrected her. And if you don't get back to work, you are going to be an unemployed bartender. I looked over her shoulder. The bar manager, a stern man in a blazer, was watching us. He had seen her stop serving customers. He had seen her leaning over the bar. He looked unhappy. Your boss is watching Brittany, I said. She spun around. She saw the manager. She went pale. You did that on purpose, she hissed at me. You distracted me. I didn't do anything, I said, backing away. I just ordered a water. You are the one who tried to sell me a sob story. I turned and walked away. I heard her cursing under her breath. I heard the clink of glass as she angrily threw the champagne flute into the sink. I walked back into the crowd of the gala. I felt clean. I felt light. I had seen the ghost of my son past, and she was fading. She was dissolving into the background noise of the city. She would keep trying. She would find another mark, another man to fool, another host to bleed. But it wouldn't be me, and it wouldn't be my son. We were immune. I left the gala early. I didn't stay for the speeches. I had seen enough. I drove my rental car back toward the highway, toward the quiet of the country. Brittany was still in that bar, pouring drinks, looking for a savior. Julian was in a cell looking at a bank book, and I was on the road looking ahead. The rearview mirror was empty. The past was finally gone. I stood at the bar of the charity gala, nursing a sparkling water and watching the crowd of wealthy patrons mingle. I had not planned on staying long, but duty to the foundation required me to show my face. The room was filled with the city elite people who 2 years ago would not have looked twice at me unless they needed something repaired. Now they nodded respectfully as I passed. They knew the name King Foundation. They knew the work we were doing. I turned back to the bar to set down my glass. "Hello, Thaddeus." The voice was soft, breathy, familiar. It was a voice designed to charm, to disarm, to manipulate. I turned slowly. Standing behind the bar wearing a black vest and a white shirt that was unbuttoned just enough to be unprofessional was Brittany. She looked different. The expensive highlights were gone, replaced by a duller box dye job. Her skin looked tired, the makeup a little too heavy, trying to cover the sleepless nights. But her eyes were the same. They were blue and calculating, scanning me like a barcode reader. She was working the event. The princess who wanted a penthouse was pouring gin and tonics for the people she used to try to impress. "Brittany," I said, my voice neutral. "I didn't think I would see you here," she said, leaning over the bar, pushing her chest forward. "I heard you were living on a farm now, playing cowboy." "I am," I said. "I just came into town to sign some checks." Checks. The word acted on her like a drug. Her pupils dilated. She licked her lips. "You look good, Thaddeus," she purred. "Really good. Distinguished. That suit fits you much better than the one at the wedding." I looked at her. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't hiding. She was hunting. She had spotted a target, and she was reverting to her factory settings. Seduce, manipulate, extract. "You are working," I observed. "Yeah," she sighed, brushing a stray hair from her face. "It is temporary, just until I get my business back off the ground. The internet? Well, people have short memories. I will be back on top soon." She poured a glass of champagne and slid it toward me. It was on the house. "I miss you, Thaddeus," she said, lowering her voice to an intimate whisper. "I really do. I miss our talks." "We never talked, Brittany," I said. "You talked at me. You insulted me." "That was a misunderstanding," she said quickly, waving her hand as if erasing history. "I was stressed. I was under so much pressure from my parents. You know how they are. They forced me into that mindset. They made me think money was everything." She reached across the bar, trying to touch my hand. I moved it away. "But you taught me a lesson," she continued, undeterred. "You really did. When you stood up there on that stage, it was powerful. It was the most masculine thing I have ever seen. Julian was a boy. But you are a man." I felt a wave of nausea. She was flirting with me. She was flirting with the father of the man she destroyed. She was trying to pivot. If the son was a bust, maybe the father was open for business. It was depraved. It was desperate. "You know," she whispered, leaning in so close I could smell the cheap perfume she was wearing now. "I always thought Julian wasn't enough for me. He was weak. He didn't have your fire. He didn't have your strength. I think that is why I acted out. I was looking for a real man." She looked up at me through her lashes, a practiced look of vulnerability. "I am sorry, Thaddeus. I am so sorry for everything. I was young and stupid, but I have changed. Look at me. I am working. I am humble." She paused, letting the silence hang, hoping I would fill it with forgiveness or, better yet, a credit card. "I could really use a friend right now," she said softly. "My landlord is threatening to evict me. My car broke down. I am all alone." And I know you are alone too. Maybe we could help each other. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had called me ugly, the woman who had called my son an idiot, the woman who had planned to put me in a nursing home and wait for me to die. She hadn't changed. She hadn't learned a single thing. She had just changed tactics. She was a virus looking for a new host. I picked up the champagne glass she had poured. She smiled, thinking I was accepting the offering. "You are right, Brittany," I said. "I am alone, and I like it that way." Her smile faltered. "And you are right about something else," I continued. "Julian was weak. He was weak because he let you into his life. He let a viper into his bed because he liked the way its scales shined." I set the glass back down on the bar with a sharp click. I didn't drink it. "You are not humble, Brittany," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the alcohol in the bottles behind her. "You are hungry. There is a difference. You are not sorry you did it. You are sorry the check bounced." "Thaddeus, please," she hissed, dropping the act, her eyes hardening. "Do not be like that. I am drowning here. You have millions. You wouldn't even miss $5,000. Just help me out, for old time's sake." For old times, I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The old times where you planned to divorce my son and steal my house. Those old times." "Yes," she snapped, desperate now. "Yes. I was honest about that, wasn't I? At least I had a plan. Julian was a loser. He lied to me too. He told me he was rich. We were both playing a game. I just played it better until you got involved. So pay me. Pay me for my time. Pay me for the humiliation. Give me something." She was shaking. The mask was gone completely. She was just a grifter with her hand out demanding payment for a con that failed. I looked past her shoulder. I saw the bar manager approaching. His name was Carlos. He was an old friend from my days in construction. I had helped him get the contract for this venue years ago. "Carlos," I called out, raising my hand. Carlos hurried over, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Mr. King, it is an honor. Is everything all right? Can I get you something special from the reserve?" "Everything is fine, Carlos," I said. "But I think you have a problem with your staff." Carlos frowned, looking at Brittany. "What is it, sir?" "This young woman," I said, pointing at her. "She is harassing me. She is asking for money. She is making inappropriate comments. I am trying to enjoy the evening, and she won't leave me alone." Brittany's mouth dropped open. "Thaddeus," she gasped. "You wouldn't." "I just did," I said. Carlos' face turned red. He turned to Brittany. "Is this true? Were you bothering Mr. King?" I know him," Brittany stammered. He was my father-in-law." "I don't care who he is," Carlos snapped. "You are here to work, not to beg. You are embarrassing the establishment." He pointed to the exit. "Get out. You are fired." But I need this job," Brittany wailed. "I have rent due." "You should have thought of that before you harassed a guest," Carlos said. "Get your things and go, now, or I call security." Brittany looked at me. Her eyes were filled with hate, pure, unadulterated hate. "I hope you die alone," she spat. I smiled. "At least I will die with my dignity." She threw her apron on the floor and stormed out. I watched her go. I watched the door close behind her. "I am so sorry, Mr. King," Carlos said, wiping the bar where she had been leaning. I had no idea. "It is fine, Carlos," I said. "Just do me a favor." "Anything." "Don't hire her back," I said. "She has a habit of biting the hand that feeds her." "I will make a note of it," Carlos said. I turned and walked away. I walked out of the gala into the cool night air. I felt lighter. I felt clean. Brittany was gone. She was back on the street where she belonged. She would keep trying. She would find another Mark, another man to fool. But it wouldn't be me, and it wouldn't be my son. We were safe. I got into my rental car and drove toward the highway. The city lights faded in the rearview mirror. The past was finally behind me, and the future was wide open. The sun was setting over the ridge, painting the sky in bruised purples and deep oranges. It was the kind of silence you could feel in your bones, the kind of peace I had paid a high price to secure. I was out by the south perimeter checking the fence line. A storm had rolled through 2 nights ago, and I wanted to make sure the posts were still holding firm against the damp earth. I adjusted my work gloves and tested a wire. It was tight. It was strong. Then I heard it. It was a sound that did not belong in the symphony of the countryside. It was not the rustle of a deer or the call of a hawk. It was the sound of metal rattling. It was the sound of a desperate struggle. I turned my head toward the main gate about 200 yards down the gravel road. The security lights had not flickered on yet, but in the twilight gloom I saw a shadow. It was not an animal. It was a man. He was trying to climb the 8-foot security gate. He was clumsy, slipping and scrambling, his boots scraping against the steel bars. I did not run. I did not shout. I simply stood there, my hand resting on the rough wood of the fence post, and watched. I watched as the figure managed to hook a leg over the top and then tumbled down the other side, hitting the gravel with a sickening thud. He lay there for a moment, a heap of dark clothing in the dust. Then slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up. He began to walk up the long driveway toward the house. He was limping. His posture was hunched, broken. He looked like a ghost that had been dragged through hell and spit back out. I started walking to meet him. My boots crunched on the gravel, a steady, rhythmic warning. The figure stopped. He squinted into the fading light, trying to make out who was approaching. As I got closer, the smell hit me first. It was the sour, sharp stench of unwashed sweat, old rain, and fear. It was the smell of the streets. The smell of a man who had forgotten what soap felt like. Then I saw his face. It was covered in a patchy beard matted with dirt. His eyes were sunken deep into his skull, surrounded by dark, bruised circles. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He was wearing a coat that might have once been expensive wool, but was now stained with mud and oil, the lining hanging out in tatters. He wore sneakers that were held together with duct tape. It was Julian, my son, the boy who used to demand bottle service at clubs, the man who needed a penthouse to feel worthy, the groom who had sneered at me for being a gardener. He was standing on my driveway looking like a beggar. He saw me. He saw the man in the flannel shirt and work boots standing tall and clean, his knees buckled. He didn't fall, he just sank as if the strings holding him up had finally been cut. "Dad," he croaked. His voice was a rusty hinge. It was dry and weak. I stopped 5 feet away from him. I didn't offer a hand. I didn't rush to embrace him. I stood my ground. "Hello, Julian," I said. He looked up at me, his eyes filling with tears that cut clean tracks through the grime on his cheeks. He was shaking violently. Whether from the cold or from hunger or from shame, I could not tell. "I found you," he whispered. "I looked everywhere. I went to the old offices. I went to the lawyers. Nobody would tell me where you were. But I found the deed transfer record in the public library. I walked. Dad, I walked from the bus station. It was 12 miles. 12 miles. A year ago, he wouldn't walk 12 feet from the valet to the restaurant door. Why are you here, Julian? I asked. He let out a sob that racked his entire thin frame. He reached into his coat pocket and I tensed, ready to defend myself, but he only pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a picture of us, the one I had burned at the wedding, or a copy of it. He had taped it back together. "I have nothing." "Dad," he said, holding the picture out with a trembling hand. "I lost the car. I lost the apartment. I slept under a bridge last week. I ate out of a garbage can behind a diner. Me, Julian Coleman. I ate garbage." He looked at his hands as if he couldn't believe they belonged to him. "I am hungry, Dad. I am so hungry. I haven't eaten in 2 days." I looked at him. I saw the ribs showing through his tattered shirt. I saw the hollows of his cheeks. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't a manipulation. This was survival. The arrogance had been burned out of him by the harsh reality of the world I had thrown him into. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel joy. I felt a deep, aching sadness. This was my son. This was the boy I had raised. And he had reduced himself to this. But I also knew that if I gave him money now, if I brought him inside and sat him on a velvet couch and fed him steak, I would undo everything. I would just be resetting the cycle. "Dad, please," Julian begged, crawling forward on his hands and knees in the gravel. "I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. You were right. I was weak. I was a parasite. I treated you like dirt because I hated myself. I wanted to be them. I wanted to be a St. James. But they were monsters. And I became a monster too." He grabbed the toe of my boot. He didn't let go. "Give me a chance," he wept. "Just one chance. I am not asking for the money back. I am not asking for the house. I am just asking for a chance to live. I don't want to die in the street, Dad. Please, do not let me die." I looked down at him. I looked at the top of his head where the hair was thinning and dirty. I remembered holding that head when he was a baby, promising to protect him from the world. But sometimes protecting your child means letting the world break them so they can rebuild themselves stronger. I pulled my foot away gently. "Stand up, Julian," I said. He struggled to his feet, swaying like a reed in the wind. He looked at me with terrified hope. Are you going to help me?" he asked. "I am going to give you what you asked for," I said. "A chance." I turned and walked toward the barn. "Follow me." He stumbled after me, his breath coming in ragged gasps. We walked into the barn. It smelled of hay and horses and leather. It was warm and dry. I walked to the tack room. I opened a cabinet. I pulled out a can of soup and a bottle of water. I handed them to him. He tore the tab off the can and drank the cold soup straight from the tin like a starving animal. He downed the water in 3 gulps. "Slow down," I said. "You will get sick." He finished the soup and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw gratitude in his eyes. Real gratitude. Not the fake thank you of a man receiving a check, but the primal gratitude of a man who has just been pulled back from the edge. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," I said. I reached into the corner and grabbed a shovel. It was heavy with a solid ash handle and a steel blade that was polished from use. I held it out to him. "You said you were wrong," I said. "You said you wanted a chance." "Well, here it is." He looked at the shovel. He looked at me confused. "The stables need cleaning," I said. "There are 4 stalls. They are full of manure. The hayloft needs to be restacked. The water troughs need to be scrubbed." I pointed to the bunkhouse, a small room attached to the barn with a cot and a wood stove. "You can sleep there," I said. "It is dry. It is warm. You will get 3 meals a day. Same food I eat. No better, no worse." I looked him hard in the eye. "But you work, Julian. You work every single day. You wake up when I wake up. You stop when I stop. I will pay you $10 an hour. That is minimum wage. You will save it. You will learn what $1 actually costs in sweat." He stared at the shovel. He looked at his hands, which were shaking. "You want me to be a stable boy," he whispered. "I want you to be useful," I corrected him. "I want you to learn that dignity isn't in a title or a suit. It is in the work." I took a step closer. "If you don't want the job, the gate is back that way. You can walk back to the city. You can go back to the bridge. It is your choice." Julian looked at the gate. He looked at the darkening sky. He looked at the shovel in my hand. He realized that the door to his old life was gone. There was no penthouse waiting. There was no inheritance. There was only this barn, this shovel, and this old man who was offering him the only lifeline he had left. He reached out. His hand was weak, but he grasped the handle of the shovel. He took it from me. "I will do it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I will do the work." "Good," I said. I pointed to the first stall. "Start there. The wheelbarrow is outside. Do not spill it." I turned and walked out of the barn. I didn't watch him start. I didn't need to. I heard the scrape of the shovel against the concrete floor. It was a harsh sound, a grinding sound. But to me, it sounded like music. It sounded like a beginning. I walked back to the main house. I sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. I could hear the faint sounds of my son working in the barn. He was slow. He was clumsy. He was weak. But he was working. He had come here looking for a savior. He had found a boss. And maybe if he survived the winter, he would find a father too. But that was up to him. I had given him the tool. Now he had to dig his own way out of the hole he had made. I took a sip of my tea. The night was cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt something else. I felt hope, a small, fragile hope. But it was there. And for tonight, that was enough. I watched him finish the water, gulping it down like it was vintage wine. He wiped his mouth with the back of a hand that was caked in 3 months of street grime. For a moment, he just stood there in the dim light of the barn, swaying slightly, his eyes darting around the space. I knew what he was looking for. He was looking for the guest house key. He was looking for the invitation to come inside and shower in a marble bathroom. He was waiting for the moment where the punishment ended and the comfort began. He thought the soup was the olive branch. He thought he had paid his dues by walking up the driveway. He was wrong. The soup wasn't an olive branch. It was fuel. You do not put gas in a car you intend to leave parked in the garage. You fuel it up because you intend to drive it. I walked over to the tool rack on the far wall. It was organized with military precision, every tool hung in its outline. I reached past the rakes and the hose. I grabbed the square point shovel. It was heavy with a solid ash handle that had been polished smooth by my own sweat over the last year. The steel blade was scraped and dull. It was a tool for moving heavy things. It was a tool for the dirty work. I walked back to Julian. He smiled weakly, a ghost of his old charm trying to surface through the dirt on his face. "So what now, Dad?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Do we go inside? I could really use a shower, and maybe a change of clothes. These rags, they smell." I didn't answer. I held out the shovel. I thrust the handle toward his chest. He looked at it. He looked at my face. He didn't take it. He looked confused, as if I had handed him a live snake. "What is this?" he asked. "It is a shovel," I said, my voice flat and echoing in the high rafters of the barn. "It is used for moving things you do not want to touch with your hands." "I know what a shovel is," he said, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because you are hungry," I said. "Because you want a place to sleep. Because you want to live here." I pointed toward the stalls behind him. There were 4 of them. Inside lived the quarter horses, huge animals that produced a significant amount of waste every single day. I hadn't mucked them out since yesterday morning. The smell of ammonia and wet straw was thick in the air. To me, it smelled like a farm. To Julian, it probably smelled like hell. "Those stalls are full," I said. "They need to be stripped down to the mats. The wet straw goes in the wheelbarrow. The manure goes in the compost pile out back. Then you put down fresh lime and new shavings." Julian stared at the stalls. He looked back at me, his mouth hanging open. "You are joking," he whispered. "You want me to shovel poop." "I am not joking," I said. "I do not joke about work. You asked for a chance. This is it." I took a step closer, forcing him to take the shovel or let it hit him in the chest. He grabbed it reflexively, his soft hands fumbling with the rough wood. "I pay $10 an hour," I said. "That is the rate. You work, you get paid. You get paid, you can buy food from the pantry. You can pay rent for the cot in the bunkhouse." $10, Julian sputtered. "Dad, I used to bill $500 an hour for consulting. I wore suits that cost more than this barn. Used to, I cut him off sharp as a whip crack. You used to be a lot of things. You used to be rich. You used to be married. You used to be arrogant. Now you are a trespasser with a can of soup in his belly and a choice to make." I pointed at the open barn door where the night was turning black and cold. "The road is right there," I said. "You can turn around and walk back to the city. You can go back to the bridge. You can go back to being a victim. Or you can hold on to that handle and start earning your life back." He looked at the door. He looked at the dark woods beyond. He shivered. The memory of the cold nights in his car, the fear of the streets, it was all still fresh. He knew he couldn't go back. He had nowhere else to go. I was the end of the line. But the pride was still there deep down. The rot hadn't been completely scrubbed away yet. "I cannot do this," he whined, his shoulders slumping. "I am weak, Dad. Look at me. I am shaking. I have never done manual labor in my life." "Then learn," I said. "Figure it out. That is what men do. We figure it out." I turned my back on him. I walked over to a bale of hay and sat down. I wasn't going to help him. I wasn't going to show him the technique. He had to find it himself. I crossed my arms and watched. For a long minute he just stood there holding the shovel like it was an alien artifact. He looked at the horse in the first stall, a massive beast that snorted and stomped its hoof. Julian flinched. Then slowly, painfully, he moved. He walked into the stall. The horse shifted and Julian jumped back, slamming against the wooden partition. He gasped, terrified. "He is not going to hurt you if you are calm," I called out, not moving from my seat. "The horse can smell fear. Stop shaking." Julian took a deep breath. He stepped back in. He jammed the shovel into the bedding. He tried to lift a massive load of wet, heavy straw. His arms shook. His back bowed. He couldn't lift it. It was too heavy for his wasted muscles. He dropped the shovel. He let out a sob of frustration. "I cannot," he cried. "It is too heavy. It is only too heavy because you are trying to take it all at once," I said. "Take smaller bites, son. You do not build a wall all at once. You lay one brick. You do not clean a stall all at once. You move one scoop." He looked at me, hate and despair warring in his eyes, but he picked the shovel up again. He took a smaller scoop, he lifted it, he carried it to the wheelbarrow and dumped it. Then he did it again and again. I sat there for 3 hours. I watched the sun disappear completely, leaving only the yellow glow of the barn lights. I watched my son sweat. I watched him blister. I watched him slip on the wet floor and fall into the filth he was trying to clean. He screamed when he fell. He cursed me. He cursed the horses. He cursed the world. He lay there in the muck crying like a baby. But then he got up. He wiped the manure off his face with his sleeve, leaving a dark smear across his cheek. He grabbed the shovel, and he went back to work. It was the first time in his life I had ever seen him finish something that was hard. He didn't call a cleaner. He didn't pay someone else to do it. He didn't quit. By the time he finished the 4th stall, he was trembling with exhaustion. He looked worse than when he had arrived. He was covered in filth. His hands were raw and bleeding, and he could barely stand upright. He walked over to me, dragging the shovel behind him. The metal scraping on concrete sounded like a bell tolling. He leaned the shovel against the wall. He looked at me. He didn't ask for approval. He didn't ask for a hug. "I am done," he whispered. I stood up. I walked over to the stalls. I inspected them. They weren't perfect. He had missed the corners. He had used too much lime, but they were clean. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a roll of small bills. I peeled off 3 $10 bills. 3 hours, I said. $30. I held the money out. Julian stared at the cash. $30. It was nothing. It was less than he used to tip the valet. But he reached for it. His hand was shaking violently. His fingers were stained and swollen. He took the bills. He held them in his hand, looking at them as if they were made of gold. This was the first money he had earned with his own body. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a loan. It was an exchange. Sweat for paper. Value for value. "Go to the bunkhouse," I said, pointing to the small room at the back of the barn. "There is a shower in there. There is soap. There is a cot." He nodded slowly. He turned to go. "Julian," I said. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Tomorrow we start at 5, I said. "The fence line needs clearing." He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He just nodded again and walked toward the bunkhouse, clutching his $30 in his fist. I watched the door close behind him. I heard the water running in the shower. I walked out of the barn into the cool night air. I looked up at the stars. He had done it. It was ugly. It was messy. But he had done it. He had worked. For the first time in 32 years, my son had acted like a man, and all it cost him was everything he thought he knew. 6 months is a long time in the city. In the city, 6 months is a fashion season. It is a fiscal quarter. It is the lifespan of a trendy restaurant. But on a farm, 6 months is a lifetime. It is the difference between a frozen field and a harvest. It is the difference between a soft boy and a hardened man. I watched Julian from the kitchen window. He was out by the woodpile splitting logs for the stove. It was late November, and the air had turned biting cold. 6 months ago, he would have been wearing a cashmere scarf and complaining about the draft in a 5-star hotel. Today, he was wearing a canvas jacket he bought at the thrift store for $12. He bought it with his own money. He swung the axe. It was a fluid motion. Up, pause, down, crack. The wood split cleanly. He didn't stagger. He didn't stop to wipe his brow after every swing. His hands, the hands that used to get manicures, were now stained with walnut oil and covered in calluses that were thick as leather. He had lost 20 pounds of softness and gained 10 pounds of wire muscle. He looked hungry, but he didn't look weak. He was learning the math of survival. He knew now that a cord of wood was worth $80 if you sold it, but it was worth a warm night if you kept it. He knew that a $10 bill represented an hour of sweating in the mud, not a tip for a valet. I walked out onto the porch. "Julian," I called out. He stopped mid-swing. He lowered the axe and looked at me. He didn't flinch. He didn't look down. He met my gaze. "Yes, sir," he said. "It is starting to rain," I said, looking at the gray clouds rolling over the ridge. "Leave the wood. I need you to clear out the attic. The roof leak last spring might have rotted some of the boxes up there. I need to know what is salvageable." He nodded. He put the axe away in the shed. He wiped his boots on the mat before entering the house. He respected the floors now because he was the one who scrubbed them on Saturdays. He went up the narrow stairs to the attic. I stayed in the kitchen making a pot of stew. I listened to his footsteps on the floorboards above me, the slow creak of wood, the sliding of heavy boxes. An hour passed. The rain started drumming on the tin roof, a steady rhythmic beat that usually put me to sleep. But then the footsteps stopped. The sliding stopped. The attic went silent. I waited 10 minutes. Still silence. I turned down the heat on the stove. I wiped my hands on a rag. I walked to the stairs. "Julian," I called up. "Everything all right up there?" No answer. I climbed the stairs. My boots were heavy on the treads. I pushed open the attic hatch and climbed into the dusty gloom. The only light came from a single bare bulb hanging from a rafter and the gray daylight filtering through a small circular window. Julian was sitting on the floor. He was surrounded by old tax documents, broken tools, and crates of clothes I hadn't worn in 30 years. But he wasn't looking at the boxes. He was holding a small black book. I froze. I knew that book. It was a daily planner from 1990, the year Julian turned 2. It wasn't a business ledger, it wasn't a checkbook, it was a survival log. I used to carry it in my pocket when I was a day laborer before the company, before the empire. I wrote everything down because if I lost $1, we didn't eat. Julian didn't hear me come up. He was hunched over the book, reading by the dim light. His shoulders were shaking. I stepped closer. The floorboard creaked. He jumped. He looked up at me. His face was wet. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, cutting through the dust. He looked devastated. He looked like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was choked, thick with emotion. I looked at the book in his hands. "You were not supposed to see that," I said quietly. He looked back down at the page he was reading. His finger traced the handwriting, my handwriting from 32 years ago. He read it aloud, his voice trembling. "December 24th, Christmas Eve. Dante needs formula. The soy kind. It costs $4. I only have 3. Sold my winter coat to the pawn shop on 5th. Got $10. Bought the formula. Bought him a red plastic fire truck. It is freezing walking home. But he will eat tonight." Julian looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror and realization. "You sold your coat," he said, "in Chicago, in December, to buy me milk." I didn't say anything, I just stood there. He turned the page. He read another entry. "January 12th. Rent is due. Short $50. Landlord says he will kick us out." I took a double shift at the steel mill. My hands are bleeding. The gloves wore through. I wrapped them in duct tape. I cannot feel my fingers. But I made the rent. Dante is sleeping. He looks warm. That is all that matters. He flipped through the pages faster now, desperate to absorb the history he had never known. February. Skipped lunch all week to save for Dante's shoes. March. Walked 5 miles to work to save bus fare for Dante doctor visit. He stopped. He slammed the book shut as if it were burning his hands. He looked at me, and for the first time he really saw me. He didn't see the rich father he had exploited. He didn't see the old man he had banned from his wedding. He saw the man who had starved so he could eat. He saw the cost. "You never told me," he sobbed. "You never told me we were poor. I always thought we had money. I thought you were just cheap. I didn't want you to know," I said, my voice rough. "I didn't want you to worry. A child shouldn't worry about rent. A child shouldn't know his father is hungry. My job was to carry the load. Your job was to grow." "But I grew wrong," he cried. "I grew crooked. You gave me everything, Dad. You gave me the blood out of your veins, and I spat on it." He held up the book, shaking it at me. "I sent you a bill for $600,000, for flowers, for a party. And you sold your coat for $4 so I wouldn't cry from hunger." He collapsed forward, burying his face in his hands. The sobs tore out of him, ugly and raw. It was the sound of an ego dying. It was the sound of a man realizing that he had been the villain in his own life story. "I threw it away," he wailed. "I threw away the only person who ever truly loved me." For what? For Tiffany. For people who didn't even know my name. "I am trash, Dad. I am garbage." I walked over to him. I knelt down on the dusty floorboards. My knees popped, but I didn't care. I reached out and took the book from his hands. I closed it gently. "You were lost, son," I said. "I am still lost," he wept. "How do I fix this? How do I ever pay you back for that coat, for the hunger, for the bleeding hands? $600,000 isn't enough. $1 million isn't enough. You cannot pay me back," I said. "That is not how this works. You cannot buy the past." "Then what do I do?" he asked, looking at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "You pay it forward," I said. He blinked, confused. "You learn what $1 means," I said. "You learn that money isn't magic. It is stored energy. It is stored life. When you spend $1, you are spending a piece of someone's life. Maybe yours, maybe mine. But it costs something. I tapped the cover of the black book. I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget, I said. I didn't write it to guilt you. I wrote it to remind myself why I was working. I was working for you. I stood up. I offered him my hand. It was calloused, rough, and scarred. The hand that had taped itself up to work a double shift. He looked at my hand. He hesitated. He didn't think he was worthy to touch it. "Take it, Julian," I commanded. He reached out. His hand was rough now, too. He gripped my hand. It was a strong grip, the grip of a man who had been shoveling manure for 6 months. I pulled him up. He stood there wiping his eyes with his dirty sleeve. "You are not trash," I said. "Trash doesn't cry when it reads a diary. Trash doesn't work in a barn for $10 an hour. You are just a man, Julian. A man who made mistakes." I picked up the box of old clothes I had sent him to find. "Now," I said, handing him the box. "Finish the job. These go to the Goodwill. We do not need them." He took the box. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with understanding. He walked toward the hatch. He stopped and looked back at me. "Dad," he said. "Yeah. Can I keep the book? Just for tonight. I want to read the rest." I looked at the little black book in my hand. It was my history, my struggle. "Keep it," I said, tossing it to him. "Read it. Memorize it." He caught it. He held it against his chest like a shield. "Thank you," he whispered. He climbed down the ladder. I listened to his footsteps fading. They sounded different now. He wasn't walking like a victim anymore. He was walking like a man who knew the weight of the ground he stood on. I stood in the attic for a moment, listening to the rain. I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. He knew. Finally he knew. The invoice was gone. The penthouse was gone. The lies were gone. All that was left was the truth. And the truth cost $4 and a winter coat. I climbed down the ladder. The stew was bubbling on the stove. It smelled rich and hearty. Tonight we would eat, and for the first time my son would know exactly what that meal was worth. The winter wind was howling outside, rattling the window panes of the farmhouse, but inside the air was warm and thick with a sound I hadn't heard in 10 years. Music. Real music. Not the overproduced, auto-tuned garbage Julian used to direct videos for, but raw, soulful sound that bled from the keys of the beat-up upright piano I had rescued from a church basement sale for $50. I sat in my armchair, my eyes closed, listening. Marcus was at the keys. The boy had hands that were scarred from barbed wire and calloused from the shovel, but when they touched that ivory, they turned into water. He was playing a jazz standard, something complex and mournful, and he was playing it with a hunger that you cannot teach. I am a retired man. I am a farmer now. But for 40 years, I was a kingmaker in the music industry. I know talent when I hear it. I know the difference between a kid who wants to be famous and a kid who has to play. Because if he doesn't, he will suffocate. Marcus had the fire. I opened my eyes. I watched his back hunched over the keys, his work boots tapping out the rhythm on the hardwood floor. He didn't know I was a producer. He just knew I was the old man who gave him a job and let him play the piano after chores. But someone else was watching too. Julian was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. He was holding a basket of firewood he had just brought in from the cold. Snow was melting on the shoulders of his thrift store jacket, turning the fabric dark. He wasn't moving. He was staring at Marcus with an expression that was painful to witness. It was jealousy, pure, sharp, and green. But it wasn't the jealousy of a man who wants the object. It was the jealousy of a son who realizes he has been replaced. He watched me watching Marcus. He saw the way my foot tapped along to the beat. He saw the slight smile on my face, a smile I rarely bestowed on anyone these days. He saw a connection, a language being spoken that he did not understand. Marcus finished the song with a soft, lingering chord that hung in the air like smoke. He turned around shyly, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Sorry, Mr. King," he said. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I needed to get that out." "Disturb me," I grunted, sitting up straighter. "Son, that was the best thing I have heard since 1995. You were rushing the bridge a little, but your phrasing on the chorus, that was professional." Marcus beamed. "Really? You think so?" "I know so," I said. "I used to run a label, Marcus. I have golden ears. And you have got it." Julian dropped the firewood basket. It hit the floor with a loud clatter, startling us both. A log rolled out across the rug. Marcus jumped up. Sorry, Julian, I didn't hear you come in. Julian didn't look at Marcus. He looked at me. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. You used to run a label, he repeated, his voice tight. You never talk about the label anymore. You told me that part of your life was dead. It is dead, I said calmly, bending down to pick up the log. But the music isn't. Julian pointed a shaking finger at Marcus. You never looked at me like that, he said. Not once. I tried to play piano. Remember? When I was 8. You bought me that Steinway. You hired the best teachers. But you never sat in the chair and closed your eyes and smiled like that. You just checked your watch. I placed the log back in the basket. Because you didn't care, Julian, I said, my voice low. You didn't want to play the piano. You wanted people to watch you play the piano. There is a difference. You hated the practice. You hated the scales. You just wanted the applause. I was 8, Julian shouted. I was a child. And Marcus is 20, I countered. And he just worked a 10-hour day fixing a tractor in the freezing cold, and the first thing he did when he washed his hands was come here and play. Not for money, not for fame, but because he loves it. I walked over to Marcus and put a hand on his shoulder. This boy has soul, I said. You cannot buy soul, Julian. You cannot inherit it. You have to forge it. Julian looked at my hand resting on Marcus' shoulder. It was a fatherly gesture, a mentor gesture. The kind of touch he had craved his whole life but had never earned because he was too busy trying to buy my affection instead of earning my respect. So what now, Julian whispered. Is he the new son? Is he the new Dante? Are you going to give him the empire you burned down? I am not giving him anything, I said. I am giving him a scholarship. The foundation is going to pay for him to go to the conservatory. He is going to study theory. He is going to learn composition. And he is going to pay for his own books by working in the library. I looked at Marcus. You want that son? Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning. The conservatory, he stammered. Sir, that is my dream. But I cannot afford. The King Foundation pays for talent, I said, and it pays for hard work. You have both. I turned back to Julian. He is not replacing you, I said. Nobody can replace you. You are my blood. But he is getting the opportunity you squandered. He is getting the chance to build something from the ground up. Julian's face crumbled. The anger drained out of him, leaving only a vast, empty sadness. He looked at his own hands, rough and scarred from the last 6 months of labor. I wasted it, he whispered. I wasted all of it. The lessons, the access, the time. I had the greatest producer in the world living in my house, and I treated him like a bank. He looked at Marcus. He didn't look at him with hate anymore. He looked at him with a terrible recognition. He saw the hunger in Marcus' eyes, the hunger he had never felt because he was always full. You are lucky, Julian said to Marcus, his voice cracking. You are lucky you started with nothing. Marcus looked confused. Why? Because you know who you are, Julian said. You know what you are worth without a credit card. Julian turned to me. I am going to finish the wood, he said. The stove needs fuel. He picked up the basket. He walked to the stove and started feeding the logs into the fire. His movements were efficient, practiced. He wasn't the clumsy boy who broke the stool anymore. He was a man doing a job. I watched him. I felt a pang of pride mixed with the old ache. He hadn't inherited my musical ear. He hadn't inherited my business sense. But he was finally learning to inherit my work ethic. He closed the stove door. He wiped his hands on his pants. That was good playing, he said to Marcus without looking back. You got a good left hand. Thank you, Marcus said softly. Julian walked out of the room toward the kitchen. He didn't slam the door. He didn't storm off. He just went back to work. I sat back down in my chair. Play it again, Marcus, I said. Sir. The song, I said. Play it again. But this time, slow down the bridge. Let the notes breathe. You do not have to rush. We have time. Marcus put his hands back on the keys. He began to play. The music filled the house again, warmer this time. I listened to the melody, and underneath it I listened to the sounds of the kitchen, the sound of water running, the sound of a knife chopping vegetables, the sound of my son making dinner for us. He wasn't the heir to a fortune anymore. He wasn't a prince. He was a cook. He was a cleaner. He was a laborer. But for the first time in his life, he was adding value to the house instead of subtracting from it. I closed my eyes. The music washed over me. I had lost a fortune to save a son. and I had spent a fortune to find a protege. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. And as the snow began to fall harder outside, blanketing the farm in silence, I knew that we were going to be okay. It wasn't the life I had planned. It wasn't the dynasty I had dreamed of. But it was real. And that was the only thing that mattered. The snow had settled deep in the valley, covering the farm in a blanket of white silence. It was the kind of cold that snapped branches and froze breath in your lungs, but inside the farmhouse the wood stove was roaring. I was sitting at the kitchen table cleaning an old carburetor when Lucius arrived. He didn't call first. He just drove his sedan up the icy track, the tires crunching on the frozen gravel. He walked in stamping the snow off his boots, carrying a briefcase that looked heavier than usual. He looked like a man who had just watched a building collapse and was bringing me the photos. He accepted the cup of coffee I poured him and sat down. He didn't smile, but there was a grim satisfaction in his eyes, the look of a lawyer who has finally closed the file on a difficult case. "It is done, Otis," he said, taking a sip of the black coffee. "The gavel came down an hour ago. I stopped scrubbing the carburetor. I wiped my hands on a rag slowly, deliberately. I didn't need to ask who he was talking about. The St. James trial had been the talk of the city for months. It was a spectacle, a circus of arrogance meeting consequences. How long, I asked. Arthur got 12 years, Lucius said. Grand larceny, fraud, and embezzlement. The judge didn't like that he stole from a wedding guest. He liked it even less that Arthur tried to bribe the bailiff during the recess. 12 years. Arthur St. James was 65. 12 years was a life sentence. He would die in a cage wearing state-issued cotton instead of Italian silk. And Vivian, I asked. 8 years, Lucius replied. Accomplice to fraud and possession of stolen goods. She screamed when they read the sentence, Otis. She screamed that she was a lady. She screamed that you set them up. The judge actually held her in contempt, added 6 months to the term. I looked out the window at the gray sky. I thought about the dinner at my house. I thought about the way they looked at my furniture, the way they sneered at my life. They had walked into my home like conquerors planning to strip the gold from the walls. Now they were being stripped of their freedom. They lost everything. Lucius continued, opening his briefcase and pulling out a file. The estate in the Hamptons was auctioned off yesterday. It went for pennies on the dollar to pay off the creditors. Their townhouse in the city is gone. Their cars are gone. Even their clothes were seized to pay the legal fees. He slid a photo across the table. It was a picture from the courthouse steps taken by a paparazzi. It showed Arthur and Vivian being led away in handcuffs. They looked small, they looked shrunken. Without their expensive clothes, without their jewelry, without the armor of their pretension, they were just two scared old thieves. There was no dignity in their fall. They hadn't gone down fighting for a cause. They had gone down clawing at each other. During the trial, Arthur had tried to blame Vivian, saying she forced him to steal the coins. Vivian had testified that Arthur was abusive and controlling, trying to play the victim. They tore each other apart in public, proving once and for all that their marriage was nothing but a business arrangement that had gone bankrupt. It is a fitting end, I said, pushing the photo away. They built a life on taking things that didn't belong to them. Eventually the bill comes due. Lucius nodded. But there is more. He pulled out another document. It wasn't a court filing. It was a police report. Brittany, he said. I stiffened. I hadn't thought about Brittany since the night at the gala, since I got her fired from the bar. She was a bad memory, a ghost I had exorcised. What about her, I asked. She is in the wind, Lucius said. But she left a trail. After she lost her job at the bar, she didn't go to the temp agency like you suggested. She didn't go to a shelter. She went to the casinos. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Of course she did. She was looking for the quick fix. The big win. She still believed she was special. She still believed the universe owed her a jackpot. She racked up $40,000 in debt in 3 weeks, Lucius said. She was borrowing from loan sharks Otis, the same kind of men Dante used to deal with. She thought she could charm them. She thought she could smile her way out of the interest payments. He tapped the police report. She disappeared 4 days ago. Her landlord filed a missing persons report, but the police think she is running. She emptied her bank account, what little was left of it. She stole a car from an ex-boyfriend. She is a fugitive, Otis. I pictured her. The girl who wanted a $50,000 dress. The girl who wouldn't have mixed race babies because it would ruin her aesthetic. I pictured her driving a stolen car, looking over her shoulder, sleeping in rest stops, terrified of every shadow. She had become exactly what she despised. She was a criminal. She was poor. She was dirty. She is going to get caught, I said. Eventually, Lucius agreed. Or the sharks will find her first. Either way, her life is over. The Vanderbilt name is mud. The St. James name is a punchline. She has burned every bridge she ever crossed. I stood up and walked to the stove to refill the coffee pot. The warmth of the fire felt good against the chill of the news. It was a tragedy, yes, a waste of human potential. But it was also a correction. The universe has a way of balancing the scales. For years, these people had lived high on the suffering of others. They had consumed and taken and sneered. Now they were being consumed. Dante is lucky, I said quietly. Lucius looked at me surprised. Lucky? He is in prison. Otis, he is in a cell, I corrected him. He is warm, he is fed, he is safe from the sharks, and he is learning. I looked through the doorway into the living room where the piano stood silent, waiting for Marcus to return on the weekend. Dante hit rock bottom and found a floor, I said. He found a foundation. Brittany and her parents, they hit rock bottom and started digging. They didn't want to change. They just wanted to win. And that is why they lost everything. Lucius closed the briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like a book closing. So that is it, he said. The house is clean. The enemies are gone. You won, Otis. I didn't feel like a winner. Winners get trophies. Winners get parades. I just felt tired. I felt the weight of the years and the cost of the war. But I also felt peace. The kind of peace that comes when you know the perimeter is secure. It is not about winning, Lucius, I said, sitting back down. It is about order. They brought chaos into my life. They brought disrespect. I just put things back where they belonged. I picked up the carburetor I had been cleaning. The metal was bright and shiny now, stripped of the grime and the grease. It was ready to work again. You know, I said, turning the part over in my hands. Arthur St. James took photos of my furniture. He wanted to sell my history. Now he is going to spend the rest of his life in a room with a metal toilet and a concrete bed. He wanted a view. Now he has bars. Lucius stood up and put on his coat. You are a hard man, Otis King. I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. I am a gardener, Lucius, I said. I pull weeds, and sometimes the weeds are deep. You have to pull them out by the root or they just grow back. I walked him to the door. The snow was falling harder now, covering the tracks of his car, covering the world in white. It was a clean slate, a fresh start. Drive safe, I said. I watched him leave. I watched the tail lights fade into the white swirl. Then I went back inside. I had a carburetor to finish. I had horses to feed. I had a son who was writing me letters from prison and a protege who was getting straight A's in engineering school. The St. James family was a memory, a cautionary tale. They were the dust. I shook off my boots before I came inside. They were gone, and I was still here. I sat down at the table and picked up my tools. The work continues. It always continues. But now the workspace was clean, and that was all I ever asked for. The winter had thawed into a muddy, hesitant spring. The snow was gone, replaced by patches of green pushing through the black earth, and the creek was running high and fast. I sat in my study, the door open, listening to the sounds of the house. I heard the heavy tread of work boots in the hallway. It was a sound I had grown used to over the last year. It was the sound of a man who was tired, but not broken. Julian, I called out. Called. My voice was low, but it carried. The footsteps stopped. Then they turned toward the study. Julian appeared in the doorway. He looked different than the man who had climbed my fence a year ago. He was leaner, harder. The soft edges of the city had been worn away by the wind and the work. His beard was trimmed but thick. His hands were scarred. He was wearing the same flannel shirt he had bought with his first paycheck, but now it was faded and soft from washing. Come in, I said. Close the door. He stepped inside and shut the door quietly. He stood there, hat in hand, waiting. He didn't sit until I nodded at the chair opposite my desk. It was the first time he had been in this room since the night he found the diary in the attic. He sat down. He looked at the ledger open on my desk. He looked at the pen in my hand. He knew what this was. It was a performance review. It was the end of the fiscal year. You have been here 12 months, I said. Yes, sir, he replied. 12 months. and 4 days. You have worked hard, I said. You cleared the north pasture. You rebuilt the barn roof. You dug the irrigation ditches for the vegetable garden. You didn't complain. You didn't quit. I did what I had to do, he said quietly. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking. I looked at him. I looked for the trace of the boy who used to demand bottle service. I looked for the groom who tried to steal my house. I couldn't find them. They were buried under layers of sweat and sun. But I also knew that rehabilitation is not a permanent state. It is a practice, and a bird cannot learn to fly if it stays in the nest forever. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. I placed it on the desk between us. Julian looked at it. His eyes widened slightly. He recognized the gesture. It was the same setup as the day he came to my old house demanding money, the day I gave him the lottery ticket. I saw the muscle in his jaw jump. He was remembering the humiliation. He was remembering the rage. "Open it," I said. He hesitated. He reached out his hand, rough and stained with soil. He picked up the envelope. It was heavy, heavier than a lottery ticket. He opened the flap. He reached inside. He pulled out a stack of cash, 50s and 20s banded together in neat bricks. He looked at the money, then he looked at me confused. "What is this?" he asked. I picked up my ledger. I put on my reading glasses. "I have been keeping track," I said. "Every hour you worked, every stall you cleaned, every fence post you dug. $10 an hour, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week." I ran my finger down the column of numbers. "I deducted your room and board," I continued. "I deducted the cost of your clothes and your food. I charged you fair market rent for the bunkhouse." I looked up over my glasses. "The total comes to $5,240, I said. "That is your net profit for the year." Julian stared at the cash in his hands. $5,000. A year ago, that wouldn't have covered his bar tab for a weekend. A year ago, he would have thrown it in my face and screamed that it was an insult. But today he held it differently. He held it with reverence. He thumbed the edge of the bills, feeling the texture of the paper. This is mine," he whispered. "It is yours," I said. "You earned it. You didn't steal it. You didn't beg for it. You didn't marry it. You bled for it." I closed the ledger. "That is the most money you have ever had in your life, Julian," I said, "because it is the only money that is real. The rest was just numbers on a screen. This is life. This is time." He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "Thank you, Dad. I will put it in the bank. I will save it." "No," I said sharply. He looked up startled. "You are not putting it in the bank," I said, "and you are not staying here." The air left the room. Julian's face went pale. "What?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You are kicking me out. I am launching you," I corrected him. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the fields we had cleared together. "You have done the work, Julian. You learned the lesson. You know what it feels like to be tired. You know what it feels like to be hungry. You know what it feels like to be a man." I turned back to face him. "But you cannot be a man in your father's shadow. As long as you are here, you are just my farmhand. You are just Otis King's son. You are safe here, and safety is dangerous for a man like you. You need to be out there. You need to be hungry again. But where will I go?" he stammered. "This is my home." "No," I said, "this is my home. It is my retreat. It is where I go to die in peace. You are young. You have a life to build." I pointed at the money in his hands. "Take that money. Take your truck. Drive to the city, not Chicago, somewhere new, somewhere nobody knows the name Coleman, somewhere you can be just Julian." And do what he asked, panic rising in his voice. "Whatever you want," I said. "Buy a set of tools, start a handyman business, wash dishes, paint houses, I don't care. Just build something that belongs to you." I walked over to him. I put my hands on his shoulders. I felt the muscle there, the solid strength he had built. "You wanted an inheritance," I said softly. "You wanted millions. I gave those away. But I am giving you something better. I am giving you a clean slate." I squeezed his shoulders. "You are debt-free. You are drug-free. You are delusion-free. You know how to work. That is more than I started with. I started with a shovel and a bad attitude. You are starting with $5,000 in a trade." He looked at the money. He looked at me. The fear was still there, but underneath it I saw something else. I saw a spark. I saw the same look Marcus had when he solved a structural equation. I saw possibility. "You really want me to go?" he asked. I need you to go, I said. For both of us. If you stay here, you will just be waiting for me to die so you can take over the farm. And I plan on living a long time. He let out a short, wet laugh. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Okay, he said. Okay, I will go. Today, I said. Today, he repeated. He stood up. He clutched the envelope of cash to his chest. He looked around the study at the books, at the pictures of the life I had built without him. Can I call you? He asked. Write me, I said. Letters are better. They take time. They mean more. Write me when you have an address. Write me when you have a job. Write me when you have built something worth talking about. He nodded. He understood. He walked to the door. He stopped and turned back. He looked at me for a long time, memorizing my face, memorizing the man who had broken him down to build him back up. You were right, Dad, he said. About everything. The house. The wedding. The work. You were right, I know I said. Now get out of here. You are burning daylight. He opened the door and walked out. I heard him go down the hall. I heard him go out to the bunkhouse. I heard the sound of him packing his few belongings. 10 minutes later, I heard the engine of his old truck cough to life. I walked to the window. I watched him drive down the gravel road. His truck was dusty. His tires were worn, but he was moving forward. He paused at the gate. The same gate he had climbed over a year ago. He looked back at the house one last time. Then he turned onto the main road and accelerated. I watched until the dust settled. I watched until the silence returned to the valley. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, the phantom pain of a limb that has been removed. I missed him already. I missed the boy I had raised. But I knew I had done the right thing. I had saved his life by kicking him out of it. I turned away from the window. The house was quiet. The work was done. I sat back down at my desk. I opened the ledger to a fresh page. Julian Coleman account closed. Balance paid in full. I closed the book. It was time to go check on the horses. It was time to help Marcus with his tuition application. It was time to live my life. My son was gone. But for the first time in 33 years, he was also free. And so was I. The sun hung low over the water, turning the surface of the lake into a sheet of hammered copper. The air was still, the kind of stillness that usually comes before a storm, but today it felt like a benediction. I sat in my folding chair, the canvas stretching tight under my weight, a fishing rod resting easy in my hands. The line disappeared into the dark water, connecting me to the unknown depths below. Next to me, Marcus sat on an overturned bucket. He was watching his bobber with the same intensity he applied to his engineering textbooks. He didn't fidget. He didn't check a phone. He just waited. He had learned the rhythm of the farm, the rhythm of patience. He was wearing a clean shirt, and his hands were scrubbed, but the dirt was still there deep in the creases of his knuckles. It was the mark of a man who built things. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was a good smell. It was a clean smell. It was a world away from the stale perfume and desperate sweat of the Chateau Saint-Michel. Movement on the horizon caught my eye. I looked up toward the gravel road that wound its way out of the valley and back toward the highway. A cloud of dust was rising against the tree line, illuminated by the dying light. At the center of the dust cloud was a truck. It was an old Ford, rusted around the wheel wells, the paint faded to a dull matte primer gray. The engine coughed and sputtered, a mechanical wheeze that echoed off the canyon walls. The bed of the truck was piled high with tools, a ladder, and a few boxes of clothes. It was Julian. I watched him drive. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't driving with the reckless arrogance of the boy who used to tear through the city in a leased Porsche. He was driving slow, steady, careful. He was driving like a man who knew the value of the machine he was operating. A man who knew that if this truck died, he walked. He reached the crest of the hill. For a moment, the truck was silhouetted against the setting sun, a dark shape against the fire. He tapped the brakes. The brake lights flared red, a brief bloody flash in the twilight. He stopped. I knew what he was doing. He was looking back. He was looking down into the valley, at the farmhouse, at the barn, at the lake. He was looking at the only home he had known for the last year. He was looking at the place where he had died and been reborn. I didn't wave. I didn't stand up. I just watched. I felt a tightening in my chest, a sharp pang of sorrow that was as old as time. It was the pain of a father watching his child walk out the door, knowing he might never come back. It was the pain of knowing that I had broken him to fix him and the scars would never fully heal. He wasn't my little boy anymore. He wasn't the Prince of Chicago. He was a handyman with $5,000 and a hard road ahead. He was going to struggle. He was going to be lonely. He was going to face a world that didn't care about his last name, but he was going to survive. The truck idled for another 10 seconds. Then the brake lights went dark. The engine revved a low, determined growl. The truck crested the hill and disappeared, dropping down the other side toward the highway, toward the city, toward his life. The dust cloud lingered for a moment, then settled back into the earth. He was gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for 3 years finally uncoiled. Mr. King, Marcus said softly. I turned to look at him. He hadn't looked up. His eyes were still on the water. He is going to be all right, sir, Marcus said. I looked at this boy, this stranger who had become my family. I saw the strength in his jaw. I saw the intelligence in his eyes. I know he is, I said. He has good tools. We sat in silence for a long time. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the world gray and blue. The crickets started their evening song. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the invoice, $600,000. It seemed like a lifetime ago. It seemed like a joke told by a different man in a different language. I thought about the anger I had felt, the white-hot rage that had driven me to burn down my own legacy. I had destroyed a reputation I took 40 years to build. I had humiliated my family. I had become a villain in the eyes of society, and I would do it all again. Because looking at that empty road, knowing my son was driving it with his own hands on the wheel, I felt a peace I had never known in the boardroom. I had saved him. I hadn't saved him from poverty. I hadn't saved him from pain. I had saved him from himself. I reeled in my line. The hook was empty. It didn't matter. I wasn't fishing for fish. I was fishing for time. Let us head in, Marcus, I said, standing up. My knees popped a familiar comfort. It is getting cold. We packed up the gear. We walked back up the path to the farmhouse. The windows were dark, but I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I knew how to turn on the lights. I stopped on the porch. I looked out at the night one last time. Somewhere out there on the interstate, Julian was driving. He was probably scared. He was probably lonely. But he was free. I went inside. I hung my hat on the peg. I walked into the study and sat at my desk. The ledger was there, closed. The past was balanced. I picked up a pen. I didn't open the ledger. I grabbed a piece of stationery. I wrote a note to myself. A reminder. A final closing statement for the file of Thaddeus Coleman. Disappearing isn't always an act of cowardice. Sometimes it is the most powerful statement of self-worth you can make. For years I thought love meant endurance, that a father job was to be a silent ATM for an ungrateful child. I was wrong. By removing my presence, I forced my son to finally meet himself. You cannot teach someone to appreciate the shade if you never let them feel the scorching sun. I didn't destroy his life. I destroyed his illusions. And in the silence of my absence, he finally learned the one lesson my money could never buy. Dignity must be earned, not inherited. I put the pen down. I looked at the words. They were true. They were hard, but they were true. My name is Thaddeus Coleman. I am a farmer. I am a teacher. I am a father. And my work here is done. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to make a hard choice to save someone you love, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away to save yourself? I read every single one. Until next time, keep building your own foundation.